Chapter 477. No one knew what had happened to the sacred ancestor and his group in the depths of the starry sky. No matter who asked, the sacred ancestor kept his mouth shut. One had to know that the people who had traveled with him were all the top figures of the various sects and clans. These people had died in the depths of the universe without even a corpse. Naturally, their descendants could not accept this fact. As a result, the descendants of these half-step saints jointly wrote a letter, asking the sacred ancestor to give everyone a reasonable explanation. Although the sacred ancestor had given in, he did not tell everyone what had happened in the past 20 years. Instead, he gave a simple summary, saying that his group had encountered great danger in the Great Void and that it was already a great blessing to be able to return, and then there was no more. There was not even a reasonable explanation. This time, not only the descendants of the half-step saints, but even the ordinary onlookers could not help but be puzzled. Why are you able to survive when all of your companions are dead? Moreover, you lived a better and more carefree life and even became a saint because of this? Due to the might of a saint and the fact that all the half-step saints who could mediate with him had fallen, the sacred ancestor became the #1 person in the heavens pivot realm after returning. No one dared to question him in front of his face, but the rumors became more and more intense in private. There were even some people who made wild guesses. The sacred ancestor and his group might have discovered the immortal emperor's treasury in the depths of the universe, and the half-step saints who accompanied them died in this treasury. Opportunities were always accompanied by risks. In the moment of danger, the sacred ancestor decisively dragged everyone down with him. As a result, he obtained the immortal emperor's inheritance and became a saint in a short 20 years. Otherwise, how could one explain the sacred ancestor's sudden increase in cultivation? This kind of baseless guess was almost equivalent to slander. Even so, the sacred ancestor was still unwilling to mention the details. In desperation, everyone could only cast their gazes on the last survivor of this trip, and that was the Jiang ancestor. At this time, it was likely that only the Jiang clan's ancestor knew what exactly happened in these 20 years. But what was regrettable was that, even though the Jiang ancestor's cultivation was extraordinary, when he was brought back by the Supreme Pure One, he was already heavily injured. For immortal cultivators, physical injuries were naturally not a problem. However, the Jiang clan's ancestor did not only have injuries on his physical body. The truly fatal injury was still the injury on his soul. It was unknown what they had experienced. In short, when the Jiang ancestor was brought back by the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, he was already on the verge of death, as if he had entered a state of suspended animation. Now the only survivor was in a vegetative state. As long as the Grand Pure One did not take the initiative to mention it, who would know the secret? Rumors were just rumors. One day they would collapse on their own. That was because people were forgetful. As the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor began to build the Sky Capital and prepared to open the Sky Gate to lead everyone to the outside world, no one dared to talk about the Divine Ancestor in private anymore. It didn't matter how the Grand Pure Forefather had found the major world. Its appearance was like a ray of light in the darkness, illuminating the path forward for the ancient cultivators. If he continued to spread rumors and go against the venerable ancestor, wouldn't he be digging his own grave? Therefore, other than a few people led by the Jiang clan who chose to stay in the heavens pivot realm, most of the ancient immortal cultivators followed the Taiching divine ancestor to the great world. What needed to be noted here was, it was different from what Xianxia understood. It was not that the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor had given up on the Jiang clan, but that the Jiang clan had voluntarily chosen to stay in the lower realm. The reason why the Jiang clan had become a sinner clan was that after the Divine Ancestor passed away, the Jiang clan still refused to be disciplined by the Sky Capital. The Grand Pure Divine Ancestor might not care about their crime of spreading rumors in private because of their old friendship. However, the successor of the Sky Capital would definitely not tolerate anyone slandering the Divine Ancestor. Therefore the Jiang clan was judged as a sinner clan. Even the heavens would not tolerate sinners. That was the main content recorded in the Jade Slip. Other than these old matters, what really attracted Xianxia's attention was actually a memory from the Jiang clan ancestor. Yes, the Jiang clan ancestor's memory. No one, including the descendants of the Jiang clan, knew. Not long after the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor led the ancient immortal cultivators to the great world, the Jiang clan ancestor who had been in the state of a living dead, actually woke up again. Logically speaking, the Jiang clan ancestor's soul had long been shattered, and there should be no possibility of him waking up. Therefore, after the grand pure divine ancestor came to visit a few times, he never came again. Even a saint like the grand pure divine ancestor could not save him. What method did others have to wake up the Jiang clan ancestor? But here was the strange thing. Just as the grand pure divine ancestor left, the Jiang clan ancestor actually woke up. At that time, only the owner of the jade slip was accompanying the Jiang clan ancestor. So the Jiang clan ancestor directly poured this memory into the mind of the owner of the jade slip. Then, as if he had obtained some kind of relief, the Jiang clan ancestor rode a crane to the west with a smile on his face. The last half-saint of the heavenly pivot realm fell. The Jiang clan ancestor left with a smile. However, after the owner of the jade slip obtained this memory, he was completely shocked by the scene in the memory. After thinking about it again and again, the owner of the jade slip decided to seal this past and record all the causes and effects into the jade slip. He set up a seal and waited for the fated person to know. Obviously, Xianxia was that fated person. Therefore, he was also shocked by this memory at that time, which was why Yuan Tianzuan noticed something strange. It turned out that the grand pure divine ancestor and his group had never left the solar system. Just as they flew to Saturn, a dark fissure suddenly appeared in the void and sucked the group of half-sages and supreme martial artists into it. It was a boundless dark space. After the Jiang clan ancestor fell in, he was separated from the others. He flew in the dark space for thousands of years until he was exhausted and the true essence in his body was about to be exhausted. Only then did the Jiang clan ancestor discover a ray of light. Wasn't this feeling very familiar? Wasn't it exactly the same as the strange thing that Xianxia had experienced before? However, it was different from what Xianxia had experienced. After the Jiang clan ancestor escaped from the dark space, he did not go to the great world. Instead, he returned to the place where they had disappeared. Then the Jiang clan ancestor met the grand pure divine ancestor who was quietly floating in the void and holding the heaven-bearing efficate floating mirror. At that moment, the image of the grand pure divine ancestor was completely different from the Jiang clan ancestor's memory. His appearance did not change at all. However, the monstrous pressure that was constantly emitted from his body, as well as that pair of eyes that looked down on all living things, made the Jiang clan ancestor, a half-saint, feel faintly panicked. Therefore, the Jiang clan ancestor firmly believed that the person in front of him was definitely not the grand pure divine ancestor he knew. As expected, just as the Jiang clan ancestor was stunned, the grand pure divine ancestor actually aimed the heaven-bearing efficate floating mirror at him. With a flash of white light, the Jiang clan ancestor's memory was completely cut off. However, the last scene in his memory was not the scene of the grand pure divine ancestor attacking him. Instead, it was the space wonder that had already formed behind the grand pure divine ancestor. Scattered stars, 9-star alignment. Chapter 478. The moment he saw the 9 stars alignment, a series of information slowly emerged in Xianxia's mind and gradually formed a clearer network. The dark space, the 9 stars alignment, the Tai Ching divine ancestor, the sky-bearing technique, the floating dawn mirror, the great terror in the depths of the void, and the mysterious woman entangled in chains. Until this moment, Xianxia finally understood what kind of terrifying level the mysterious woman's realm had reached. With the combined strength of the Tai Ching divine ancestor and the others, even in the heavenly jade domain, they were definitely a transcendent force comparable to a sacred ground. However, after they fell into the dark space, they were still so helpless. If not for the appearance of that white light, the Jiang ancestor might have been trapped alive inside. Even a supreme like Xianxia could enter and exit the dark space at will. How could a half-step sage like the Jiang ancestor not be able to freely travel through the various planes? From this, it could be seen that the Jiang ancestor was definitely controlled by some higher-level power, which caused him to be unable to successfully escape from the dark space. As for the reason why the white light appeared, combined with Xianxia's previous experience, it should be the result of the mysterious woman and the Great Terror's game. It was obvious that the mysterious woman was kind to the cultivators from Earth. And the Great Terror's standpoint was completely different from the mysterious woman's. This was because Xianxia not only felt a strong pressure from him, but also a murderous aura that seemed to be mixed with mountains of corpses and seas of blood. If that powerful murderous aura was placed in the solar system, the result would be that wherever the murderous aura went, everything would wither and not a single blade of grass would grow. In addition, from the memories of the Jiang ancestor, the Tai Ching divine ancestor should have been possessed and controlled by someone. Even a half-step sage could be easily possessed, so how high was the other party's cultivation level? Above the sage was the Immortal Emperor. Whether it was the Heavenly Jade Domain or the Heavenly Pivot Domain, it had been a long time since an Immortal Emperor had appeared. The Immortal Emperor seemed to only exist in the myths and legends of the primordial era. If the Supreme Xianxia could destroy a planet with all his strength, then the Immortal Emperor could collapse the heavens and split the earth with a flick of his finger. It was truly the definition of holding the sun and moon in one's hand and stepping on the universe. Such a terrifying cultivation had completely exceeded the scope of Xianxia's imagination. Perhaps when one reached the mysterious woman's level, they should no longer be called immortal cultivators but immortals. Xianxia looked down at the soul mirror in his hand, and a peculiar expression suddenly appeared on his face. The 9-star alignment in the memories of the Jiang clan's ancestor was actually different from what he saw with his own eyes. In the memories of the Jiang ancestor, the Grand Pure One held the soul mirror and floated in the air like a god. As the 9 stars lined up, strange nomological imprints appeared one after another in the periphery of the solar system. These nomological imprints shone with a dazzling golden light. They were like gold foil pasted on a circular wall, encompassing the entire solar system within them. Cheng-Hua, that brat, said. For the past 10,000 years, there has been a powerful seal on the periphery of the solar system. Even if a celestial venerable were to come, he would definitely die. The two of them barged in recklessly, but unexpectedly they didn't lose their lives because of this. Instead, they arrived on Earth without any obstructions. Calculating the time when the two of them came, wasn't it when Heaven Capital was destroyed? Could it be? This seal was removed because of this. But if there's a seal on the periphery of the solar system, why was I able to pass through this seal so easily and safely return to Earth? Could it be because of that mysterious woman again? And the reason why I suddenly went to the Heavenly Jade Realm, which is billions of light years away, might also be related to that mysterious woman. At the thought of this, Xianxia couldn't help but raise his head and look toward the distant edge of the solar system. At that moment, Xianxia's eyes were no longer as clear as before. Instead, they were filled with curiosity toward this unknown world like that of a little fellow. The Immortal Emperor used the universe and the starry sky as a chessboard, and all living things as chess pieces. Then what kind of chess game were they playing? While Xianxia was focused on exploring the past, the young lady who had risked her life to barge into the Heavenly Pivot ruins had returned. However, this time she was no longer alone. Instead, she had brought with her a team of several hundred people from the Supreme Palace enclosure. The young lady stood at the bow of the ship with an excited expression. If it weren't for the fact that there was a tall middle-aged man in his 40s standing beside her, she would have screamed out in excitement. Daddy will ask you one last time. Are you sure you really entered the Heavenly Pivot ruins from here? Father, I've said it many times. I really went in. There's nothing inside. If you don't believe me, let me go in first later. I'll prove it to you. The young lady's name was Zhou Xian. The middle-aged man next to her was her father, Tobague. After Tobague received the news from his daughter, he considered the importance of this matter and didn't inform the family head immediately. Instead, he brought his personal guards and followed Zhou Xian here. Immortal cultivators had a long lifespan. It wasn't rare for 10 generations to live in the same house. Therefore, there were usually many large families in the Supreme Palace enclosure. One could refer to the Jiang clan on Daiyu Island for this. The Xianyuan, Dongfang, and Tuoba families were all large families in the Supreme Palace enclosure. But different from Xianyuan Chenghua and Dongfang Yiji, Tuoba Xiu came from a branch family. So in terms of background, Tuoba Xiu was absolutely not worthy of Dongfang Yiji. And this was one of the important reasons why she was willing to die for Dongfang Yiji. From the moment the two of them started dating, Tuoba Xiu felt that she wasn't worthy of Dongfang Yiji. So she sacrificed far more than Dongfang Yiji. Under the leadership of Tuoba Xiu, the group soon arrived at the location where she entered the Heavenly Pivot ruins. Out of caution, Tobague didn't let his daughter take the risk. Instead, he called out 2 men from the team and let them go to explore. These men were prisoners from hostile forces of the family. After being captured by the Tuoba family, they had been brainwashed and controlled by a secret method. They had completely become the Tuoba family's pawns. Although their cultivation wasn't high, they were not afraid of death. They were the best candidates to explore the way. Soon the two men piloted a small starship and rushed directly to the heavenly pivot ruins. Tobague nervously waited on the side. The moment he saw the two figures disappear, his pupils shrank. If it weren't for Tuoba Xiao guaranteeing with her life, Tobague would never have believed her words. He was different from Tuoba Xiao's naivety. Tobague knew that once this news was confirmed, it would cause a sensation in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, after sending the men to investigate, Tobague's mood was even more nervous than Tuoba Xiao's. He paced back and forth on the bow of the ship. After waiting for about half an incense stick of time, Tobague finally saw the scene he had been dreaming of. Those two men, they actually came out of the heavenly pivot ruins unscathed. Listen to my orders. Set off. Destination: Heavenly Pivot Ruins. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 479. Xianxia returned to the Sai courtyard with the soul mirror after learning about the Tianshu ruins. The soul mirror. Sky-bearing technique, floating dawn mirror. It was laughable that this innate treasure, which could kill a half-step saint in the hands of the Grand Pure Ancestor, had been treated as a useless treasure for tens of thousands of years. Therefore, when Xianxia learned of the true power of the soul mirror, he began to think about how to take it for his own use. On one hand, it was because part of Yingying's soul was still imprisoned in it. On the other hand, it was because he didn't have a single magic treasure to back him up. If he encountered an opponent weaker than himself, Xianxia might be able to rely on his cultivation level to suppress them and win easily. However, if he encountered a half-step saint who was at the same cultivation level as him, or even a higher one, Xianxia reckoned that he wouldn't be able to protect himself at all. Moreover, there were signs of an immortal emperor appearing in the world. Xianxia didn't think that he could jump around in front of an immortal emperor with his mere dongshu cultivation. Although the mysterious woman didn't seem to have any enmity towards him, as the saying went, if you leaned against a mountain, it would collapse. If you leaned against a man, he would run away. The mysterious woman had already saved him once. Would she save him a second time? If he couldn't even protect himself, how could he protect his family? Therefore, the matter of increasing his strength was imperative. Xianxia finally had some sense of crisis. If his sister-in-law knew about this, she would probably be sincerely happy for him. However, at the Dongshu realm, accumulating the world's spiritual energy wasn't so important anymore. Comprehending and applying the laws of heaven and earth was the only thing Xianxia needed to focus on now. Therefore, Xianxia set his sights on the strange dark space. The flow of time in the dark space was very strange. Compared to Earth, time inside could even be said to be stationary. After all, a day in the dark space was roughly equivalent to a year on Earth. What kind of terrifying time ratio was this? Although there was no matter or spiritual energy in the dark space, Xianxia needed to calm down and stabilize his cultivation. Therefore, the dark space became the best place for him to cultivate. After entering the Dongshu realm, Xianxia actually had the ability to travel between planes. However, the prerequisite was that he had to know the coordinates of the small plane he wanted to go to. The universe where Earth was located was the main plane. The dark space and the large world were small planes. Small planes were unstable and at the same time extremely difficult to discover. If he didn't leave the coordinates in advance, Xianxia wouldn't be able to find the specific location of the small plane even if he poked a hole in the sky. This was the fundamental reason why the Grand Pure Ancestor and the others had spent so much effort to find another cave abode in the universe. Dongshu stage immortal cultivators would only be able to freely travel to and from small planes after finding them through spatial rifts and setting up coordinates in them. Night. After the little fellow fell asleep, Xianxia couldn't wait to fly into the air and get busy. This was the first time he took the initiative to enter the dark space. Therefore, after closing his eyes and adjusting his breathing to bring his body to the best state, Xianxia gently exhaled a mouthful of turbid air and prepared to start trying to open the passage between the two worlds. Opening the passage was actually the same as opening the heavenly gate. Therefore, the moment Xianxia moved, an extremely strong spiritual energy fluctuation was set off 10,000 meters in the sky. Under the guidance of the spiritual energy, the clouds were like a vortex, gradually forming a huge cyclone. Then an extremely dazzling light suddenly bloomed in the center of the cyclone. Like the heavenly gate, the position of the light was obviously the entrance of the passage between the two worlds. Seeing this, Xianxia didn't hesitate at all. His body swayed and he directly flew toward the light. It was like diving from a high platform. The moment Xianxi's body disappeared into the light, the entire world suddenly quieted down. There was no sound and no light. He was back. Xianxi lit up a ball of light and looked around. After confirming that he was back in the familiar dark space, he directly sat cross-legged in this endless void. At this moment he was the only source of light in this dark space. As the deduction continued, two faintly discernible golden lines gradually appeared beside Xianxi. These were the two lines of law that he currently controlled. One led to Earth, the other to the outside world. 2 points as a line. As long as he found the base of the two planes, he could use this line of law to travel back and forth between the two worlds. Point, line, surface, body. And this was the basic form of the first law of heaven and earth. When Xianxi was able to freely control face, his cultivation would naturally be able to take another step forward. Today was the weekend. Primary school students did not have to go to school on weekends, so every Saturday night, the little girl would play until late into the night, until the next morning when she would wake up. Early in the morning, the little girl did not see Xianxi when she woke up, so she took advantage of the time when Qin Ruiying was cooking for her to stroll around the courtyard. After this period of time together, Changhua and Yizhi were already very familiar with the little girl. Therefore, when the little girl saw the two dejected coming out of the room, she enthusiastically greeted them. "Brother Changhua, Brother Yizhi, good morning." "Good morning, Nian, good morning to you." Changhua did not say anything and Yizhi did not seem to be in a good mood. After trying hard to squeeze out a smile at the little girl, the two were like students who had made a mistake, obediently waiting outside the Chuehua gate for Qin Xueqing's call. It was not that they were deliberately giving the little girl a hard time, but the reason why their mood was so heavy was because today was the day of being beaten again. Qin Wanqing was incredible now. After this period of actual combat tempering, she had completely walked out of a martial artist's path that belonged to her. So even if the two of them attacked together, they were not her match at all. Qin Xueqing seemed to be very vengeful. As her strength grew stronger, her attacks became more and more ruthless, so that the two of them would be beaten half to death by her every time. Although their lives were not in danger, but it was really painful. Looking at the two of them now, where was the young and frivolous attitude they had when they first came here? Their injuries had just recovered, and sister-in-law was ready to ask them to go out to practice again. The little girl did not know the details. Therefore, when she saw Qin Xueqing coming out of the room, she enthusiastically greeted Qin Xueqing. "And are you going out to play? Can you bring me along?" Hearing this, Qin Xueqing suddenly stopped in her tracks. She lowered her head and looked at the cute little niece in front of her, who was like a porcelain doll. Looking at her big bright eyes, Qin Xueqing could not help but hesitate for a moment, as if she was thinking about something. After a while, Qin Xueqing made a decision in her heart. Didn't Qianxi not want Nian to cultivate? Then I'll make her want to learn. Therefore, Qin Xueqing was like an evil woman who used a lollipop to lure a little girl, and for the first time, a smile hung on her face. Nian Aunt wants to take them to practice martial arts. It's the kind of martial arts that you see on TV. Do you want to learn? If you want to learn, Aunt can teach you. Jutian Divine Emperor. Chapter 480. Martial Arts. After hearing Qin Xueqing's words, the little fellow suddenly blinked her eyes blankly. It was no wonder that her reaction would be so cute and slow. After all, Nian was still young. Currently she was only at the age where she liked to watch cartoons. Although it was not that she had never watched wuxia movies, but the wuxia movies that were popular in recent years could not be regarded as wuxia movies in the true sense. At best, they could only be regarded as historical romance movies. Just based on those melodramatic romantic scenes, how could they win the hearts of children? Therefore, the little fellow's impression of martial arts was completely at the ignorant stage. She could not be compared to the children of the 80s and 90s. 20 or 30 years ago, children usually liked to use a wooden stick as a long sword. They learned the martial arts moves on TV, and before they made a move they must shout out the name of the move. For example, the 18 dragons subduing palms, 9 strategies beyond the swords, Buddha's palm and other martial arts skills. Basically every child knew 1 or 2 moves. Thinking about it, he felt a little regretful. It was a pity that the little fellow was not born in the hot-blooded era where the martial arts atmosphere was pervasive. Qin Xueqing's attitude towards the little fellow had always been neither cold nor warm. Today she rarely took the initiative to take her to play, so the little fellow was naturally very happy. Therefore she immediately blinked her big bright eyes, and then slightly tilted her head and asked in a coquettish voice, "Auntie, what is martial arts? Is it fun?" "It's fun. After you learn it, you can be like the heroes on TV, there's nothing you can't do." "Really?" "Of course, why would Auntie lie to you?" At this moment the smile on Qin Xueqing's face was really very bright. Looking at her proud look, she was simply like a demon holding candy to lure a little girl. She was just short of raising her tail. "Hey, you two, come over here, I'll show Nyan what martial arts are." Qin Xueqing had always been taciturn. Today, in order to lure the little fellow to take the bait, she really used 120% of her strength. Seeing that the little guy seemed to be tempted, Qin Xueqing immediately let Chenghua and Yiji come to the center of the courtyard, ready to use them as punching bags to show the little guy what martial arts were. Since he said it was martial arts, then he definitely couldn't use magic. Chenghua and Yiji had been beaten up all this time, and under the influence of what they heard and saw, the two of them had learned a few fierce moves. As a result, a scene that shocked the little fellow appeared. In the center of the courtyard, Qin Xueqing was like a graceful butterfly, sometimes leaping up, sometimes crouching on the ground, twisting and turning, displaying her graceful figure. Perhaps it was because Qin Xueqing rarely sparred with others in the outside world, so even though her martial cultivation was extremely profound, she still lacked the fierce killing intent that came from mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Therefore her martial arts looked more like a dance. "It's beautiful. Auntie is so beautiful." Since it was an exhibition match, Qin Xueqing's moves were naturally more gentle than usual, and it could be said that she didn't overdo it. The little fellow couldn't see the subtlety of it, but he was still completely attracted by her graceful dancing posture, so he excitedly clapped at the side. Looking at the little fellow's eager appearance, Qin Xueqing couldn't help but smile slightly. After forcing Chenghua and Yiji back with one palm, she lightly landed beside the little fellow, then asked with a smile, "How is it, do you want to learn?" Hearing this, the little fellow immediately nodded his head like he was pounding garlic. "Yes." "Okay, then come over here, Auntie will help you stretch your tendons and pull out your bones." "Okay." The little fellow didn't understand, only thinking that Qin Xueqing wanted to play a game with him, so he eagerly went over. Just as Qin Xueqing was teaching the little fellow the horse stance, Qinshi finally returned to the courtyard. This was the first time he entered the dark space, and he hadn't figured out the specific time ratio between the two worlds, so it caused him to come back slightly late. If it was in the past, it wouldn't be a problem if Qinshi came back a little late. But today was different. Qin Xueqing actually took advantage of his absence to start teaching the little fellow cultivation. Therefore, the moment Qinshi's figure appeared in the courtyard, the temperature seemed to drop a lot. "What are you doing?" Qinshi's tone didn't have any emotional fluctuations, as if he was talking about something very ordinary, but those who were familiar with him should know. This was a sign that he was angry. Qinshi was angry. After realizing that something big might happen next, Chenghua and Yiji immediately looked at each other, then quietly left the courtyard. It wasn't good to stay here for long, leaving was the best plan. At this moment, the little fellow also noticed Qinshi's figure, so she immediately stopped what she was doing and ran towards Qinshi eagerly. "Daddy, you're back?" The little fellow happily jumped into Qinshi's arms. Qinshi gently pinched her little face, then directly carried her from the ground. "Yes, Daddy went out to do something just now, so I didn't have time to make breakfast for you. You're not hungry, are you?" "I'm not hungry." The father and daughter talked as if there was no one else around, while Qin Xueqing waited silently by the side. When Qinshi looked at her, Qin Xueqing calmly replied, "I'm teaching her martial arts." Hearing this, before Qinshi could reply, the little fellow happily interrupted and shouted, "Auntie is teaching me martial arts, it's very fun. Daddy, do you want to learn?" "Is that so?" Qinshi chuckled. He gently reached out and pinched the tip of the little fellow's nose, which immediately caused her to act coquettishly. Qinshi seemed to be trying to make the little girl happy, but a question suddenly popped out of her mouth. "Why did you teach her without my permission?" It had to be said that his sister-in-law's behavior today really annoyed Qinshi a little. After all, from the day he returned to Earth, he had made up his mind to create an ordinary and happy childhood for the little fellow, just like ordinary children, to enjoy the pure happiness that they should enjoy at their age. The road of cultivation was long, but childhood was only a few short years. Did he want to deprive her of even these short years? She's willing to learn, I'm willing to teach, it's that simple. Then did you ask for my consent? Do you need it? Don't you need it? Hearing this, Xianxia couldn't help but sneer and coldly replied, I started practicing martial arts when I was 3 years old. I had already practiced obvious strength when I was her age. Since learning martial arts is good for the body, why don't you let her learn? She's just a child. This time Xianxia was really a little angry, so even his tone became much colder. Seeing this, Xianxia was not afraid. Instead, she righteously retorted, she is also a person with the ability to think independently. Please ask her whether she is willing to do it before you make a decision for her. Being choked by Xianxia was so angry that he couldn't even speak. At this moment, the atmosphere in the yard was really a little awkward. The little fellow lay on Xianxia's shoulder, looking left and right at her father, right at her aunt, completely not understanding what they were quarreling about. But fortunately, just when Xianxia and Xianxia were in a deadlock, Qin Ruiying suddenly appeared. She was holding a bowl of hot porridge in her hand, which was the white fungus and lotus seed porridge that she personally cooked for the little fellow. Nian, come in and eat. Chapter 481. After hearing Qin Ruiying's call, the little fellow's eyes suddenly lit up. So she immediately signaled Xianxia to put her down, and then ran back to the west wing with Qin Ruiying. In fact, how could the little fellow not know that her father was quarreling with her aunt? Although she didn't understand why the two were quarreling, it was the first time such a hostile scene appeared in the courtyard, so it made the little fellow feel very awkward. Therefore, after hearing Qin Ruiying's call, the little fellow directly ran away like Chonghua and Yiji. Sister, you judge, do you think what I said makes sense? Xianxia had long known about Qin Ruiying's memory loss, but because she was now angry, she wanted to pull Qin Ruiying, such a strong foreign aide, to support her. After hearing Xianxia's question, Qin Ruiying, who had already walked up the stairs of the west wing, also stopped. But unfortunately, Qin Ruiying didn't intend to turn back to support her. It's none of my business, you guys can quarrel slowly. After saying this sentence very calmly, Qin Ruiying took the bowl back to the room. Xianxia didn't have much reaction to this. Because she already knew that with Qin Ruiying's current character, she wouldn't care about anyone other than Yan. And the reason why she still chose to ask Qin Ruiying was because she didn't want to continue to be in a deadlock with Xianxia. Therefore, after hearing Qin Ruiying's answer, Xianxia rolled her eyes at Xianxia, and then turned back to the east wing without looking back. This is great. In the courtyard, which was very lively just now, in the blink of an eye, only Xianxia was left alone. Xianxia was really depressed in his heart, but there was nowhere to vent, so he could only return to the guest room with a stomach full of resentment like the two sisters. What could he do? Was he going to beat his sister-in-law? This was the first time that someone questioned Xianxia's education philosophy. Long before Qin Ruiying lost her memory, Xianxia had already discussed with Qin Ruiying whether to teach the little fellow to cultivate. Unlike Xianxia's firm attitude, Qin Ruiying's attitude at that time was somewhat ambiguous. She neither agreed nor opposed, as if she wanted to leave this decision to the little fellow herself. But how old was Nian? How could she understand what cultivation meant? It was also because of this that Xianxia never thought of teaching Nian cultivation. Xianxia's words seemed to be very reasonable, but she had never even had a boyfriend, so raising a child, she knew nothing. Xianxia sulked in the room. But after thinking about it, his mind was still haunted by Xianxia's powerful question. She is also a person with the ability to think independently. Please ask her if she agrees before you make a decision for her. Am I really meddling too much? Across the wall, Xianxia muttered to himself. Then, as if he had thought of something, he suddenly got up and quickly left the room, then came to the outside of the west wing, and looked at the mother and daughter in the room through the window. In the room, the little fellow was holding a big bowl of porridge and slurping it. Qin Ruiying sat next to her and whispered from time to time, "Drink slowly, be careful not to choke." What a beautiful scene this was. Seeing this scene, Xianxia's depression in his heart suddenly disappeared. He silently waited outside the window. After the little fellow finished her breakfast, she looked back and saw that her father was still outside the room. She immediately became as happy as a little bird, opened her arms and threw herself directly into Xianxia's arms. "Dad, the porridge made by Mom is delicious." But Mom also said that you can't eat it. Dad, are you envious of me? Hearing this, Xianxia couldn't help but laugh and pinch her little face, pretending to scare her. Eat, all you know is to eat all day. Be careful, you will become a big fatty in the future, then no one will like you. Why won't anyone like me if I become fat? Dad, didn't you say that you like me the most? The little fellow pouted unhappily as if she was angry. Seeing this, Xianxia could only quickly coax her. Dad will definitely like you no matter how you look in the future. In Dad's heart, Nian will always be the most beautiful girl in the world. After hearing Xianxia's answer, the little fellow rolled her big eyes and suddenly grinned. What about Mom? Is Mom not beautiful? Mom is as beautiful as you. Really? Of course, you are Mom's child. How could you look different from Mom? That's right. Then when I grow up, I will definitely be as beautiful as Mom. As if she had encountered something extremely happy, the little fellow giggled, which made Xianxia couldn't help but laugh foolishly with her. The father and daughter stood on the steps and whispered to each other. After Qin Ruiying cleaned up the table and prepared to go back to the kitchen to wash the dishes, Xianxia offered to help her wash the dishes. Unexpectedly, Qin Ruiying didn't even look at him. She carried the bowl and chopsticks to the kitchen, minding her own business. Xianxia had long been used to Qin Ruiying's current attitude, so he didn't take it to heart. Seeing that his wife didn't need his help, he carried the little fellow back to the guest room where he was currently staying. Just as he returned to the room, Xianxia put away the smile on his face and with a very serious expression he looked at the little fellow and asked, Nian, tell Dad honestly, do you like the things that Auntie taught you? Hearing this, the little fellow blinked her eyes as if she didn't quite understand the meaning of his words. Just as Xianxia expected, she was only a 6-year-old child. How could she understand what cultivation meant? It was like parents sending their children to learn music, art and dance. Without the guidance of parents, no matter how talented a child was, it was impossible to be naturally interested in these things. And on this question, Xianxia did indeed make a mistake. That was, he had never let the little fellow come into contact with cultivation, so how could he judge whether the little fellow liked cultivation or not? His sister-in-law wasn't wrong. Since Nian was a person with the ability to think independently, then she should have her own choice. Just like learning music, art and dance. There were no disadvantages to cultivation, instead there were countless benefits. So, on the premise that he had the resources in this area, why couldn't he leave the choice to the little fellow herself? If Nian liked it, he would teach her. If Nian didn't like it, then it was fine not to learn. Therefore, after thinking this point through, Xianxia very solemnly handed the choice to the little fellow. Nian, tell Dad, do you want to learn? 9 Heavens Divine Emperor. Chapter 482. Do you want to learn? The little fellow was not used to Xianxia being so serious. Therefore, while she was thinking hard about the true meaning of this sentence, she couldn't help but put her thumb in her mouth. While sucking on her finger, she tilted her head and seriously thought about her father's words. You're not allowed to eat your finger. Xianxia saw the little fellow's hesitation. Therefore, he gently removed the little fellow's finger from her mouth and hugged her in his arms. Then, using a very gentle tone, he asked again, don't be afraid, just tell Daddy if you want to learn or not. If you want to learn, Daddy will teach you. I promise I'll teach you better than Auntie. After hearing Xianxia's words, the little fellow finally reacted. She rubbed her head against Xianxia's shoulder a few times before hesitantly replying, yes. Her voice fell. Without waiting for Xianxia's reply, the little fellow looked up nervously and asked, Daddy, is learning to dance very difficult? There are many children in our class learning to dance. They say learning to dance is very, very tiring and very painful. I'm not afraid of being tired. But I'm afraid of pain. The little fellow's voice became softer and softer until it was almost inaudible like a mosquito. At this moment, Xianxia finally understood her thoughts. After all this time, the child actually understood learning martial arts as learning to dance? Xianxia did not know whether to laugh or cry. Looking at the little fellow's reluctant look, Xianxia could not help but smile and rub her little head. Then he carried her to the bed and said to her with a serious face, Nian, you have to know. No matter what you learn, before you learn it, it will be a very difficult and tiring process. So before you choose to learn, you have to make up your mind and confirm if you can really endure this hardship. If you feel tired and tiring halfway through learning or even unwilling to learn anymore, then no matter if you learn to dance, learn to draw, or learn anything else, you are destined to achieve nothing. So you must remember what I said to you today. There is only one way to fail, and that is to give up halfway. Once you've made your choice, you have to persevere no matter how hard it is. Do you understand? Xianxia tried his best to speak slowly so that the little fellow could hear every word he said. After hearing this, the little fellow's reaction was just as Xianxia had expected. After all, Nian had never been a spoiled child who was afraid of hardship and fatigue. She could understand and distinguish right from wrong. Therefore, when Xianxia asked her again if she wanted to learn, the little girl's hesitation disappeared and turned into determination. Yes. Whether it was learning martial arts or dancing, it was fine. The little fellow's attitude was what Xianxia really cared about. Since she had already made up her mind, how could Xianxia stop her? All right, then Daddy will teach you personally. Remember, don't listen to your aunt in the future. Jingle, jingle, jingle. What does she know? Daddy can flatten her with one hand. Come, sit down first. Daddy will teach you how to draw qi into your body. Don't worry, it won't hurt at all. Xianxia finally began to teach the little fellow cultivation. Of course, the things he taught were completely different from what Qin Xueqing taught. Qin Xueqing only wanted to teach the little fellow martial arts, but Xianxia directly taught her the immortal cultivation method. So the question was, why didn't her sister-in-law directly teach the little fellow the immortal cultivation method that Xianxia taught her? Instead, she only taught the little fellow some basic skills of tendons and bones. One had to know that her sister-in-law had been a heavenly being for a long time and was already considered a real immortal cultivator. The reason why she didn't directly teach the little fellow cultivation was actually because she had considered Xianxia's attitude towards this matter. Therefore, she used martial arts as an excuse to indirectly remind Xianxia. The child was not young anymore, so she naturally knew what to do and what not to do. Since cultivation was not harmful to the little fellow, and it could even strengthen her body and enhance her physique, why didn't she learn it? Swords and sabers were innocent, and sins were all caused by people's hearts. Qin Xueqing's point of view was not wrong, so although she had a sour face all day long, her heart was warm. Xianxia was afraid that the little fellow would accidentally hurt other children at school, but with the little fellow's current wisdom, how could she bully others for no reason? After all, she was now a class leader, a young pioneer, and a candidate for the school's 3 good students. Under Xianxia's careful guidance, the little fellow embarked on her own journey of cultivation in a daze. At the same time, Tuoba Xiu hurried to Earth with her reinforcements. Unlike Tuoba Xiu's excitement, although Tobagwe was also very excited, he was more nervous and puzzled in his heart. There were too many rumors about the Dubhe ruins, so even though Tobagwe was now in this peaceful galaxy, he still felt like he was in a dream. Out of safety considerations, Tobagwe didn't send out any death warriors to explore the planets. Instead, he used his divine sense to quickly sweep the planets. After determining that there were no signs of surging heaven and earth's spiritual energy, he hurried to the next planet. Their journey here had been too smooth. It was different from the mountains of knives, seas of fire, and hellish danger that people had always imagined. The so-called Dubhe ruins was in fact an ordinary galaxy that couldn't be more ordinary. There was only one star in this galaxy, and although the rest of the planets were large, they weren't life planets at all. There wasn't even a bit of heaven and earth's spiritual energy in the periphery. There was no spiritual energy, no life. Naturally, it was impossible to give birth to any ancient vicious beasts, evil spirits, or other such terrifying existences. Therefore, Tobagwe couldn't help but wonder if he had come to the wrong place. How could such a broken place be called an Empyrean forbidden area? Could it be his cultivation was too low so he couldn't discern the mystery? Tobagwe was really puzzled. But at this time, the lookout who had been standing at the bow of the ship and observing the situation suddenly cried out in alarm. "Look! There's someone there." The moment Tobagwe heard these words, it was as if he had been electrocuted. He suddenly shot up from his chair and flew to the bow of the ship at the fastest speed he had ever flown in his life. "Where is it?" Before Tobagwe arrived, Tobagwe's voice had already sounded in the lookout's ear. The lookout pointed. Just as Tobagwe was about to speak, Tobagwe had already turned and rushed to the helm of the ship. "Turn the helm and head to that planet. From now on, listen to my orders in all matters. Don't make a move without permission." If the situation changes, I will use the cup as a signal to kill all of you. Remember. Remember. As Tobagwe issued a series of orders, the incomparably huge star Cha also turned around and flew towards the seemingly small moon. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 483. Ever since his family moved to the moon, Yuhuan Tianzuan seemed to have accepted his fate. Because he knew very well that with the remaining strength of Tiandu, it was impossible to match Qianxi, who had already become a supreme being. Therefore he chose to compromise and instead put all his energy into presiding over the reconstruction of Tiandu. Did you see that? The enemy was on that blue planet. But what should we rely on to find the other party for revenge? Was it because of the resentment and anger in the heart that had nowhere to vent? Or was it because of the ridiculous self-esteem that faced death with equanimity and would rather die than live in disgrace? Therefore, whenever someone questioned why he was silent, Yuhuan Tianzuan's reply was always so calm and objective. Did he really have no resentment in his heart? How was that possible? If it were not for Qianxi, Yuhuan Tianzuan would still be the head of the 10 celestial lords, ruling the tens of millions of descendants of ancient cultivators in the world alone. But now, tens of millions of people had already turned into smoke, and only a few thousand people were left, relying on their strong cultivation base to survive the catastrophe. What did this mean? It meant that Tiandu had no future. Could it be possible to rebuild a complete Tiandu with only the remaining celestial lords, divine generals and celestial lords? What a joke. Therefore, Yuhuan Tianzuan's greatest wish now was not to kill Qianxi, but to be able to see Tiandu blossom in its former glory in his lifetime. In order to achieve this goal, Yuhuan Tianzuan lowered his always high head to Qianxi. As for whether others could understand his approach, it was not something he needed to worry about. Yuhuan Tianzuan decided to rebuild a new imperial palace on the moon. There was no dragon head peak here, so he chose the highest mountain on the far side of the moon, and the materials were all taken from the ruins of Saturn's ring, which could be considered as making good use of waste. On this day, as usual, Yuhuan Tianzuan stood on the top of the mountain, silently examining the ugly new home in front of him. All of a sudden he sensed a strong spiritual qi fluctuation above his head. Yuhuan Tianzuan subconsciously thought that it was Qianxi again, so his face was immediately covered with a layer of frost. However, what Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't expect was... He raised his head, but what he saw was not Qianxi's detestable smile, but a strange ship with a strange appearance and an incomparably large size. The ship was as big as a ship on the sea. At the same time that Yuhuan Tianzuan discovered the ship, the people on the ship seemed to have discovered him as well. Thus, the huge ship sped towards his location. In the blink of an eye, the giant ship landed about 500 meters away from the surface of the moon. And this distance of 500 meters just happened to be the edge of Qianxi's seal. The people on the boat seemed to know that there was a seal here. As soon as the ship stopped, a figure flew out from it. The person who came was Tobagwe. Tobagwe's cultivation was only at Yuanying, so as he got closer and closer to the moon, his mood became more and more nervous. Because he saw the Star Lords and Divine Generals who were busy on the ground, and he also felt an incomparably strong true essence fluctuation from these people. These people in front of him were all existences above golden core. And looking at their busy posture, it seemed that they were doing some of the lowest level of manual labor. Using golden core yuanying as manual labor? After seeing this scene, Tobagwe was really frightened. The cultivation of this person in front of me is unfathomable. I can't feel a trace of true essence fluctuation from him. And looking at this person's expression and posture, it seems that he is supervising the work of these people? Could it be, this person is the master of the Dubhe ruins? In the blink of an eye, countless thoughts flashed through Tobagwe's mind. He saw Yuhuan Tianzuan, and Yuhuan Tianzuan also saw him. This was the gaze of an Empyrean. At that moment, Tobagwe felt a pressure like a falling stone smashing into his heart. So he immediately cupped his fists towards Yuhuan Tianzuan and bowed. Then he said in a clear voice, "Junior Tobagwe greets Senior." Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't answer. He was like an aloof emperor. After sizing up Tobagwe, he looked at the giant ship to the side. Seeing Yuhuan Tianzuan not speak, Tobagwe thought that his trespassing on the Dubhe ruins had angered him. Therefore, after a moment of hesitation, he immediately added, "I have long heard of the Dubhe ruins' reputation. Today I trespassed on this precious land for a reason. I hope Senior won't blame me." Tobagwe lowered his posture to a very low level. Even so, Yuhuan Tianzuan still didn't respond. Tobagwe thought that Yuhuan Tianzuan was deliberately putting on airs for him to see. So he bowed his head towards Yuhuan Tianzuan again and said, "A few days ago, Junior's two unworthy nephews trespassed on this precious land because they were young and ignorant. Now that there is no news of them, my family is a little worried. After several discussions, my family's elders sent Junior to look for traces of them. My children are young and ignorant. If they have disturbed you, I hope Senior won't blame them. Here, Tobagwe, I apologize to Senior on their behalf." As Lin Ming's voice fell, Tobagwe still maintained his bowing posture. He seemed to be waiting for Yuhuan Tianzuan's reply. In truth, this was also a kind of probe. He was probing Yuhuan Tianzuan's attitude towards these intruders so that Tobagwe could think of a way to deal with them. From beginning to end, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't respond. Even the expression on his face didn't change. In fact, it wasn't that Yuhuan Tianzuan was deliberately putting on airs to give Tobagwe a show of strength. The reason he didn't respond was because Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't understand Tobagwe's words at all. Tobagwe's accent was somewhat similar to ancient Chinese. It gave off a strange feeling. Yuhuan Tianzuan remained calm on the surface, but the truth was that he was seriously deducing in his mind. It wasn't until he truly understood Tobagwe's words that Yuhuan Tianzuan finally opened his mouth and spoke. Where did you come from?" Reporting to Senior, this junior comes from the Supreme Palace Enclosure. The Bagwe family. Supreme Palace Enclosure? What is that place? As Yuhuan Tianzuan spoke, he flew up into the sky. He seemed to be very interested in Tobagwe, so he went straight to the top of the seal, almost at the same level as Tobagwe. Tobagwe didn't know the secret, so he immediately bowed and said, "Reporting to Senior, the Supreme Palace Enclosure is just outside the Tianshu ruins. If Xianxia flies at full speed, it will only take 2 days to reach it." "Is that so?" Yuhuan Tianzuan nodded calmly, as if he wasn't very interested in Tobagwe's answer. Immediately afterward, he suddenly pointed to the giant ship not far away and slowly asked, "Is this the Xianxia you speak of?" Hearing this, Tobagwe subconsciously looked in the direction that Emperor Yuhuan was pointing at, and then quickly replied, "That's right." Before Tobagwe's voice fell, he suddenly felt an incomparably massive amount of true essence rush towards him from behind. It turned out that Yuhuan Tianzuan actually took advantage of the moment he turned around and directly launched an attack at him. Chapter 484. Tobagwe never thought that Yuhuan Tianzuan would suddenly attack him and even use a sneak attack, completely disregarding his identity. Therefore, when he noticed something strange behind him, it was too late to resist. Just like the acupuncture points in Wuxia novels, Emperor Yuan's hold body technique, which had been accumulating power for a long time, was unleashed. Tobagwe immediately froze in place as if he had been hit by the sunflower acupuncture point technique. Tobagwe tried to break free, but the difference in cultivation between him and Yuhuan Tianzuan was too great, so he couldn't break free for a while. Seeing this, Tobagwe immediately turned hostile and cursed, "I called you Senior in vain, but I didn't expect you to be so despicable and shameless." Tobagwe kept cursing. Seeing the sudden change of events, the entourage he brought with him this time jumped out from Xianxia and tried to come to the rescue. But soon, these followers all stopped what they were doing and floated several hundred meters away from Tobagwe with blank expressions on their faces. They only had a few hundred gold core cultivators on their side, and at most 3 to 5 yuaning. But what about the other side? There were thousands of divine generals and star lords, and 6 Empyreans who appeared out of nowhere, standing directly in a row with Yuhuan Tianzuan. What was going on? Everyone couldn't help but look at each other. No one dared to take a step forward. Even Xiu was stunned in place. She was naive, but she was definitely not stupid. In this tense situation, there was no need to guess. Her father should have accidentally angered the other side? So Xiu, who didn't know what was going on, immediately walked out of the crowd and carefully came to Tobagwe's side. She followed her father and bowed respectfully to Yuhuan Tianzuan. "The Tuoba family didn't mean to offend Senior. Please let my father go." Hearing this, Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan, who had a cold expression on his old face earlier, smiled and replied with a chuckle, "You are guests from afar, so why would this old man make things difficult for you?" After all, Tuoba Xiu was still inexperienced, so she couldn't understand Yuhuan Tianzuan's strange behavior. Just as she stood rooted to the ground, Thinking about how to resolve this conflict, Tobague, who was bound to the side, seemed as if he had suddenly discovered a secret. He couldn't help but shout out in shock, "Xiu, don't be afraid. They can't hurt father. Retreat. Everyone retreat. Get away from this formation. Just now, I only thought that this was the mountain protection array that you guys had set up. I didn't expect that. This formation is actually a prison used to imprison you." Tobague came from a branch family. Since he was able to serve as a commander of the clan at such a young age, he naturally wasn't an idiot. Just like how Yuhuan Tianzuan had been observing him, he had also been observing Yuhuan Tianzuan. Tobague always felt that something was wrong. It wasn't until Yuhuan Tianzuan made a move and the divine generals and star lords leapt out from below, but not a single one of them managed to pass through the array formation, that Tobague finally regained his composure. The truth was similar to what he had guessed. How was this a mountain protection array? It was simply an entrapment array that only allowed people to enter and not leave. When Xianxia had laid down the array formation, he hadn't used any special magic treasures or flags. Thus, the strength of this array formation wasn't very high. It was also because of this that Tobague had mistakenly thought that this was a mountain protection array. Otherwise, with Heaven Capital's current strength, it wasn't impossible for them to escape from it. But this place was so close to Earth. If they really tried to break the array formation, they would inevitably alarm Xianxia, the one who had laid down the array formation. Before they could succeed in breaking the array formation, the Great Demon King would have already descended to the moon to deal with them. And the reason that Empyrean Yuhuan was able to capture Tobague through the Great Array formation was entirely because his cultivation was far higher than Tobague's. Thus, he was able to mobilize the world's heaven and earth spiritual energy to capture Tobague. It was like a tourist playing with a tiger through a fence, and then accidentally having his clothes bitten by the tiger. It looked terrifying, but there wasn't any danger at all. In the worst case, he could just tear his clothes and give them to the tiger. With Tobague's cultivation, Yuhuan Tianzuan could only hold him for an incense stick of time. After an incense stick of time, he would naturally be able to escape. After figuring out the crux of the matter, Tobague completely calmed down. He calmly said, "Senior's cultivation is profound. If you insist on keeping this junior here to chat with you, then it is not impossible. But if you have other requests, then please forgive this junior for not accompanying you." Seeing Tobague put on an appearance like a dead pig that wasn't afraid of boiling water, Empyrean Yuhuan didn't feel offended in the slightest. Instead, he chuckled and said, "Since you've already seen through the clues, then this old man will also be blunt. Actually, you don't need to make wild guesses. The reason this old man captured you is only to ask you a few questions. I hope you can answer truthfully." There were many people in Tiandu. Tobague didn't dare to tear apart Yuhuan Tianzuan, lest he cause more trouble. Therefore, after hearing Yuhuan Tianzuan's words, Tobague immediately replied, "Senior, please speak. This junior promises to tell you everything he knows." In fact, Tobague had already made up his mind. No matter what Yuhuan Tianzuan said next, he would never take half a step closer to this great array formation. As long as he could endure until the body lock technique was lifted, he would immediately take his people and leave this damned place. The reason was simple. Even a fierce character like Yuhuan Tianzuan was imprisoned here. Then what kind of terrifying existence was the one who imprisoned him? So even if Tobague was given 10 times the courage, he still wouldn't explore the Dubhe ruins. Tobague honestly waited for Yuhuan Tianzuan to ask his questions. But after waiting for a while, Yuhuan Tianzuan seemed to have finished discussing with the other Empyreans. Then he finally asked his first question. "First question, how is my Tiandu's strength? How is it compared to your Tuoba family?" "Tiandu's strength is valiant, superior to the Tuoba family by 30%. Second question, with Tiandu's strength, what is its position in the Supreme Palace enclosure?" Hearing this, Tobague couldn't help but be stunned. At this point in time, he had also vaguely guessed Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan's objective. Therefore, his originally relaxed state of mind became tense again. It is in the top 3, but if it is compared with Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, Tiandu may be slightly inferior. After hearing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan's face suddenly flashed with a trace of surprise. He probably didn't expect that, with Tiandu's strength, it was actually not the top force in the Supreme Palace enclosure. But this was also good, because only in this way could he be more confident in achieving his goal. So, after Yuhuan Tianzuan was silent for a while, he finally asked his third question. Third question. If my Tiandu is willing to unite with the Tuoba family in the form of marriage, can the Tuoba family accept my Tiandu to enter the Supreme Palace enclosure and become a force for the Tuoba family? Wonderful Book House. Chapter 485. Enter the Supreme Palace enclosure. After hearing these words, even though Tobagwe had a premonition in his heart, he couldn't help but feel a little dizzy at this moment. Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan was really frank and straightforward, not hiding the thoughts in the depths of his heart at all. Was he tempted? Of course he was. So even though Tobagwe was not the head of the Tuoba family, he subconsciously stood from the perspective of the head of the family and began to seriously consider Yuhuan Tianzuan's proposal. But unfortunately, such an important decision wasn't something that Tobagwe could easily make. Therefore, after pondering for a while, he couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva, and then nervously replied, reporting to Senior. This is a serious matter. Junior's words carry little weight and my weight in the family is limited. Please forgive me for not being able to give you an immediate answer. How about this? Junior will immediately set off to return to the Supreme Palace enclosure and report this matter to the head of the family. If the head of the family has this intention, then Junior will ask him to personally come and discuss the details with you. What does Senior think? Tobagwe was indeed tempted, but he wasn't stupid. With Heaven Capital's background, why would they need to rely on others and even take the initiative to propose an alliance with the Tuoba family? Could it be that Heaven Capital needed the protection of the Tuoba family to gain a foothold in the Supreme Palace enclosure? How was that possible? Divine generals, star lords, and even the 7 Empyreans. Although the world was big, where couldn't one call home? Therefore, Yuhuan Tianzuan wasn't trying to form an alliance with the Tuoba family at all, but to divert the Tuoba family and even the entire Supreme Palace enclosure's influence to oppose the master of the Dubhe ruins. Heaven Capital's strength was already terrifying. Then how terrifying was the great figure that imprisoned them? This great figure should be the true master of the Dubhe ruins, right? Seeking luck and avoiding disaster was everyone's nature. Therefore, after thinking about it several times, Tobagwe finally decided to stay out of it. So even if Yuhuan Tianzuan used Heaven Capital as a bargaining chip, Tobagwe didn't dare to easily get involved. Tobagwe tried to be perfunctory. But how could Yuhuan Tianzuan be so easily fooled? Thus, after seeing the hesitation on Tobagwe's face, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately gave him a strong dose of medicine. Tobagwe was so frightened that he nearly broke free from his shackles. Go back and report to the Patriarch? If this old man is not wrong with your aptitude, it will probably take you another 300 to 500 years to successfully advance to the celestial venerable realm. Since that's the case, let's make a deal. As long as you agree to this old man's request, this old man can guarantee that you will become a heavenly venerable within 60 years. What do you think? After hearing these words, Tobagwe was thoroughly shocked. Yuhuan Tianzuan's words were tactful enough. In reality, how could he not know how capable he was? Not to mention 300 to 500 years, even if he spent his entire life with his talent, he might not be able to successfully advance to Empyrean. Therefore, after hearing Yuhuan Tianzuan promise that he could successfully advance to Empyrean within 60 years, Tobagwe's heart was finally moved. I don't know what Senior's request is. If it is not beyond the scope of this junior's ability, this junior can give it a try. Hearing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan's face suddenly revealed a satisfied smile. Don't worry, I won't embarrass you. As long as you agree to this old man's request. This old man can even make a heart demon oath here, guaranteeing that I will fulfill my promise in the future. So, can we talk openly and honestly now? After a detailed discussion, Tobagwe and Yuhuan Tianzuan finally reached a consensus. Yuhuan Tianzuan's request was very simple. That was, Tobagwe would send out death warriors to wreak havoc on Earth in order to contain Xianxia. At the same time, Yuhuan Tianzuan would gather everyone's strength and take advantage of this opportunity to break the seal of the Great Array. As long as the Great Array was broken, the remnants of Tiandu would immediately board the giant ship and leave the Dubhe ruins with Tobagwe. Wasn't the plan simple? Whether this seemingly simple plan could be carried out smoothly or not, in fact, it would depend on how much Yuhuan Tianzuan knew about Xianxia. Xianxia was indeed a supreme. But he was not an omniscient and omnipotent God. As long as Tobagwe followed the plan and simultaneously launched a destructive attack on Earth from all directions, then, would Xianxia rush over to stop them from breaking the array as soon as possible? Or would he rush over to deal with those ants that dared to cause trouble in his territory? For Yuhuan Tianzuan, the ancient immortal cultivators represented by Tiandu were obviously the true masters of Earth. Therefore the Homo evolutus living on Earth were nothing more than ants to him. If it wasn't for Xianxia stopping him in time, causing him to fail in building the Soul Bridge, then Tiandu should have successfully descended to Earth by now. Once Tiandu succeeded in descending, what followed would inevitably be a massacre that would sweep across the globe. Dynasties would change, rivers and mountains would change masters. A new regime would always be built on the corpses of countless people. With Yuhuan Tianzuan's understanding of Xianxia, he could basically be sure that, once Earth was threatened, Xianxia would inevitably solve it as soon as possible. Then they could use this opportunity to break the seal and fly freely in the sky. Yuhuan Tianzuan used the entire Tiandu as a bargaining chip and the Empyrean realm as bait. Not only did he satisfy the collective interests of the Tuoba family, but he also satisfied Tobagwe's personal interests. Then, what reason did Tobagwe have not to take the risk? Take a gamble and turn a bicycle into a motorcycle. Take a gamble and turn yellow soil into gold. Under Tobagwe's command, all the death warriors he brought with him were dispatched. In order to ensure the success of the plan, Tobagwe gave all his magic weapons to these death warriors, hoping that they could delay Xianxia for a while. Tuoba Xiu didn't know what agreement her father and Yuhuan Tianzuan had reached. However, when she saw those small star carts each carrying 3 to 5 men of sacrifice, she faintly had a bad premonition in her heart. "Father, what are you doing?" Tuoba Xiu wanted to know the details. But what she didn't expect was, her father, who had always been very gentle to her, seemed to have changed at this moment. Not only did he not answer her question, but he impatiently locked her in the cabin. "Father, what's wrong with you? Let me out." Tuoba Xiu struggled with all her might. But the cabin door had been set up by Tobagwe, so she couldn't go out at all. Seeing that Tobagwe didn't respond for a long time, Tuoba Xiu finally gave up this futile struggle. Then she silently went to a porthole and looked at the blue planet not far away through the porthole. She stared at the planet in a daze. Suddenly, a strong true essence fluctuation that made one's heart palpitate suddenly surged out from the side. Tuoba Xiu quickly looked down and saw a group of people led by Yuhuan Tianzuan floating at the edge of the array, attacking it with all their strength. Their plan, it began. Chapter 486. Tobagwe had brought a total of 200 death warriors with him, but unfortunately, the average cultivation of these death warriors wasn't high. Besides a few golden cores, most of them were at the foundation establishment stage. Therefore, in addition to these death warriors, Tobagwe had to sacrifice most of his followers in order to ensure the smooth progress of the plan. Although most of these followers were from the side branches of the Tuoba family, they were still considered to be from the same branch as Tobagwe. Some of them even called him grandfather. It was precisely because of this that when Tobagwe made this decision, his heart was actually dripping blood. This was the so-called success of a general was built on the bones of 10,000. In the face of absolute benefits, the only thing Tobagwe could do was silently make a promise in his heart. He promised that he would treat the family of these followers well in the future. This was an unavoidable sacrifice for the sake of a great cause. Tobagwe believed that, once the plan succeeded as a party to this transaction, he would obtain an unimaginable interest. In fact, as long as he could smoothly become an Empyrean, then with the support of Yuhuan Tianzuan, Tobagwe could even choose to establish his own family and become a rising power comparable to the Tuoba family. In order to lure Tobagwe into the trap, Yuhuan Tianzuan had even directly made a heart demon oath in front of him. In the face of such generous transaction conditions and such an honest transaction partner, how could Tobagwe not be moved? Of course there were risks. Since he chose to stand on Yuhuan Tianzuan's side, it meant that he would inevitably become a thorn in the side of the master of the Dubhe ruins. Once the plan failed, Tobagwe didn't need to think to know how miserable his fate would be. Even so, Tobagwe chose to stand on the side of benefits. Only children could distinguish between right and wrong. Adults only looked at benefits. In the face of absolute benefits, some people could even betray their own flesh and blood, let alone distant relatives 3 or 5 generations away. Therefore, the Tuoba family's action team set out according to plan. In order to delay as much time as possible, Tobague ordered 3 people to form a group. Each group would drive a small star car to ensure that when they were intercepted, they wouldn't be shot down by the other side. These small star cars weren't high-grade, so they didn't have the ability to jump through space. However, even at full speed, his speed was still comparable to that of a Yuanine cultivator. Thus, not long after these over 100 teams set out, Tobague received a reply from each team. The various groups were already in position. They were only waiting for Tobague's order. Then these warriors from Supreme Palace enclosure would immediately enter the atmosphere, setting off a storm of blood and dismembered limbs. Tobague turned to look at the moon not too far away. After quickly communicating with Yuhuan Tianzuan through divine sense, he gritted his teeth and transmitted his voice to the other teams in a voice that was close to a roar, "Kill! Kill! Kill! Kill!" As the battle cries rang out one after another, the Xianxia ships rushed towards the land below at the fastest speed as if they were racing a dragon boat. In an instant, 100 barges strive against the current, the one who strives first. 1,000 sails are launched and the one who advances bravely wins. Perhaps this could also be considered a war. The soldiers did not need to think about how this war started, nor did they need to think about what role they played in this war. They only needed to do one thing, and that was, according to Tobague's instructions, they would launch an inhumane massacre of all life on this planet. The first to be attacked was not the United States with powerful armaments but Wuxia. Because the Western Earth's altitude was higher, and Mount Everest was nearby, a Xianxia ship landed along Mount Everest and soon arrived at Shigatse. Just like the song My Hometown in Shigatse: the blue sky is filled with white clouds, and the beautiful river is filled with green waves. An eagle flies by here, leaving behind a moving song. It was the pearl of the plateau and was also known as the most beautiful manor. But on this day, this beautiful manor was destined to be baptized by war and completely turned into scorched ruins. The person in charge of this Xianxia ship was Tobague's most capable follower, Tuoba Hong. In modern terms, although Tuoba Hong also had the blood of the Tuoba family, he had long been out of the family, so he could not be regarded as the blood of the Tuoba family. Naturally, he did not have the qualifications to worship the ancestors of the Tuoba family. Here was what needed to be mentioned. Whether it was the Tuoba family, the Shenyuan family, or the Dongfang family, there were too many people like Tuoba Hong. Their birth status was far lower than the average Tuoba family member, so they needed to work harder than most people and even risk their lives. As long as they could get the approval of the family, then they could marry a direct woman of the Tuoba family, and through this way of marriage they could consolidate and improve their status in the family. And this was the common promotion mechanism in big families. Even Tobague wanted to climb up, so how could Tuoba Hong, who was at the bottom of the family, not want to climb up? Therefore, after Tuoba Hong received the order from Tobague, he was more excited than anyone else. It was like soldiers only cared about when the military pay was paid. In Tuoba Hong's eyes, this was not a war at all, but a great thing for him to get credit for. Since Tobague had clearly stated that he wanted to kill everyone on this planet, then he would kill. The more he killed, the better. Tuoba Hong came to the sky above Shigatse, and after glancing at the city below, he could not help but show a satisfied smile. "This is it, let's start." His tone was calm, but the expression on his face was particularly excited. After seeing his 2 companions nodding in response, Tuoba Hong could no longer hold back the excitement in his heart, and directly stood on the bow of the ship and made a gesture. 5-element spell, Raging Inferno. This spell was temporarily taught to everyone by Tobague. After all, compared to the 4 elements of metal, wood, water, and earth, the fire element spell was obviously stronger in terms of destructive power. And with Tuoba Hong's brazen move, a flame comparable to the scorching sun appeared over the city out of thin air. The area of the flame was as big as a basketball court. Before it fell to the ground, a heat wave swept over the city. Fire! Fire! Put out the fire! The flame hit an apartment building, and the fire instantly engulfed the entire building. The sudden fire seemed to have alarmed the entire city. People rushed to the streets and looked up blankly in the direction of the rising smoke. But just when everyone looked up to watch the fun, one after another, huge flames like flints thrown by ancient catapults, crazily smashed into the center of the city in front of everyone. Why did flames suddenly fall from the sky? Was this a natural disaster? Or was it the wrath of God? No one knew the reason, just as no one could see Tuo Bahong in the sky. The devout believers immediately knelt on the ground, wailing and begging Buddha for forgiveness. But they didn't even have time to complete the ritual, and their bodies had been completely engulfed by the fire. Cool. So cool. Let's go to the next place. Tuo Bahong laughed and glanced at the city below, then directly called his companions and left. No way, this planet was too big. They had few people, so naturally it was impossible to really kill them all. So after a fire hurriedly burned Shagats, Tuo Bahong immediately turned the bow and sailed all the way to India according to the previously established route. And this was the action plan drawn up by Tabague in order to contain Xianxia. Wherever Xianxia passed, it would become a purgatory of fire in the world. Chapter 487. One after another, Xianxia landed all over the world. While Tuo Bahong was burning Shurgaze, the rest of the teams also launched an attack on the cities below. From the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere, from Asia to Africa. From Wuxia to the United States, from Shurgaze to Kathmandu, any city with a large population was bound to become the priority target of Tuo Bahong and his team. Everything was as Yuhuan Tianzuan said. The indigenous people on this planet were too weak. If it weren't for Xianxia, who came out of nowhere, the earth would have long become Tiandu's new home. In order to successfully persuade Taoba, Yuhuan Tianzuan provided the shadow stone they had left when they fought with Xianxia in the outside world. The shadow stone recorded the entire process of the fight between the two sides in detail. And this was obviously what really moved Taoba. Xianxia fought with Tiandu twice. The first time ended with the mysterious woman's rescue, and the second time ended with Yuhuan Tianzuan opening the Sun-Moon Star Array. With Yuhuan Tianzuan's character, how could he honestly give both shadow stones to Taoba? Compared with Tiandu, Xianxia's biggest disadvantage was not strength but influence. Although Xianxia's personal strength was strong, he was only one person after all, not a large organization with many eyes and ears and followers. He came alone. He also went alone. Even if he could block millions of lions with one sword, it was still difficult to resist the treachery behind his back. Everything was going according to plan. Therefore, at the same time that Tuo Bahong and his team launched the attack, Yuhuan Tianzuan on the moon also began their operation to break the array. With the 7 Sky Lords as the leader, the Divine Generals and Star Lords as the assistants. With all their strength they broke through this array. When the surging true essence collided with the array, Xianxia finally noticed the strangeness. At this moment he was accompanying the little guy in the yard to find the sense of qi, and teaching the little guy how to draw qi into the body and refine the essence into qi. The sudden change suddenly made Xianxia slightly absent-minded. However, Xianxia didn't even have time to figure out the reason carefully. The little guy's slightly puzzled voice suddenly sounded in his ear. "Dad. Look there. What is that? Is the sun falling?" Hearing this, Xianxia quickly raised his head and looked in the direction the little guy was pointing, but he saw that in the sky thousands of meters high, a huge flame appeared out of thin air. Looking from a distance, the flame was like the sun, smashing towards Shangjing City at an extremely fast speed. Seeing this, Qin couldn't help but be startled. But soon after, a burst of uncontrollable anger suddenly rose in his heart. You're courting death." Since the seal had been touched, it meant that Yuhuan Tianzuan was forcefully breaking through the formation, so Xianxia obviously did not take the sudden appearance of the fire in front of him to heart. With a ruthless howl, a long sword formed from true essence appeared out of thin air above the courtyard. Then, like a meteor, the long sword instantly cut through the sky and shot straight towards the ball of flames. Bam! With a muffled sound, the ball of flames completely turned into a cloud of white smoke and dissipated. Fortunately, it was afternoon and the sun was shining brightly in the sky, so not many people noticed the abnormality just now. "Yin, wait for me here obediently. Daddy will be right back." Just as Yuhuan Tianzuan had guessed, Xianxia's first reaction was to rush to the moon to settle the score with him. However, as he soared into the sky and spread out his divine sense, Xianxia suddenly discovered there were signs of true essence fluctuations in the air. Xianxia followed these fluctuations all the way and almost instantly came to the front of one of the Xianxia. "Who are you? Why are you making trouble here?" After using true essence to forcibly stop the Xianxia, Xianxia frowned and looked at the 3 people on the ship. Seeing this, the 3 men of sacrifice on the ship did not even bat an eyelid and directly launched the fiercest attack towards him. Courting death. These men of sacrifice were only at the gold core stage. In front of Xianxia they were not even ants. The current situation was urgent. Yuhuan Tianzuan was still breaking the formation, so Xianxia did not have time to play the game of torture with them. So he directly used a secret method on the 3 people on the ship. Soul snatching. Later Xianxia finally understood everything. Although these men of sacrifice were brainwashed every once in a while, they still clearly remembered the last order given by Tabagui, that was, kill. Wherever they go, kill without mercy. Since Xianxia knew the cause and effect, there were only 2 choices in front of him. Either he immediately rushed to the moon and beheaded Tiandu on the spot, or he immediately rushed to all parts of the world to stop the killing of the Tuoba family's men of sacrifice. If he chose the former, then with the lethality of immortal cultivators to ordinary people, it was estimated that before Xianxia succeeded in defeating the 7 Sky Lords, human beings would be declared extinct first. What a vicious plan. What a vicious heart. Yuhuan Tianzuan was determined that he would not leave the earth alone. This was the angriest day in Xianxia's life. On one hand, it was because Yuhuan Tianzuan's behavior really touched his bottom line. On the other hand, it was completely because he was annoyed with his own inaction. Knowing that the 9-star alignment meant the opening of the seal, he did not make any defensive preparations in advance. The reason was very simple. Because Xianxia had always prided himself as an ordinary person. So from the moment of his return he only wanted to be like an ordinary person, to have an ordinary and happy family, to live an ordinary and happy life. Xianxia had truly achieved a small recluse in the wild and a large recluse in the city. But it was precisely because of this. He was found an opportunity by Yuhuan Tianzuan and successfully exploited such a big loophole. Thinking of this, Xianxia couldn't wait to rush to the moon immediately and tear Yuhuan Tianzuan into pieces with his own hands. But the current situation forced him to stay on Earth. After all, if he delayed here for a second, another city might become a sea of fire. In the face of those ruthless immortal cultivators, what could the poor human beings do to resist? In desperation, Xianxia had to look up in the direction of the moon, and fiercely gritted his teeth and directly made his heart demon oath. Yuhuan Tianzuan, what a good Yuhuan Tianzuan. Don't you like to make a heart demon oath? Then I, Xianxia, will also make a heart demon oath today. If I don't kill you in this life, I swear that I am not human. His mouth contained the heavenly law and his words were law. If there was any disobedience, there would be no hope for the heavenly law in this life. Chapter 488. It was broad daylight and the universe was clear and bright. After Xianxia made the heart demon oath, the clothes on his body suddenly puffed up. Subsequently, a surge of incomparably surging true essence, like a huge tide, suddenly spread out with Xianxia's body as the center. They saw he stood alone above the 9 heavens. His sleeves fluttered in the wind, making flapping sounds. When the divine sword Dharma idol condensed and took shape, Xianxia grabbed the sword hilt and took 7 steps in the air. After 7 steps he suddenly pointed the long sword in his hand to the sky. At the same time he shouted with a fierce expression, "Rise." In an instant, tens of thousands of divine sword Dharma idols connected and formed beside him. When he raised his sword, tens of thousands of swords suddenly arrived. I'd like to see, who on earth dares to behave atrociously in my territory? Before his voice fell, Xianxia's entire person had completely turned into a stream of light, directly disappearing in mid-air. The densely packed divine sword Dharma idols followed closely behind Xianxia. From afar the long swords in the sky were like giant dragons dancing in the air. They bared their fangs and brandished their claws as they pounced on any enemy they encountered along the way. Following the signs of vital essence fluctuations, Xianxia killed all the way from North China to South China, and then from East China to West China. At that moment he was the last guardian of this divine land. Under the absolute suppression of the realm, the men of sacrifice of the Tuoba family could not even see Xianxia's appearance clearly. One after another the long swords directly pierced through their bodies. At the same time they destroyed the Xianxia that they relied on to survive. Xianxia's speed was already fast enough, but there were still many cities that had completely turned into a sea of fire. Time was tight, and Xianxia did not even have time to participate in the rescue operation of each city. Therefore he could only hurriedly cause a storm over these cities. Then he turned around and ran to the next target. Although the men of sacrifice of the Tuoba family were weak, they relied on their numbers and were scattered in every corner of the world. They acted almost at the same time. Therefore, by the time Xianxia had completely wiped out the men of sacrifice in Wuxia, nearly 2 minutes had passed. This was simply a time race. Now it was time to see who could reach the finish line first. At this time, far away near the moon, Tobagwe was also aware of the situation on Earth. Tobagwe had a magic tool in his hands. Through this magic tool he could immediately know the situation of each follower. It had to be known that Tobagwe had sent out a total of 435 followers for this trip. After sending all these people out, there were only 15 people left, including Tuoba Xiu. Tobagwe had truly gone all out this time. But he never would have thought. From the moment these people set off to the moment they fell, the time it took to brew a cup of tea had not even passed. In such a short period of time, nearly 100 of his followers had perished. At this rate, it was estimated that the owner of the ruins, whom he had never met before, would kill his way to the moon in less than 30 minutes. Thus, when Tobagwe learned of this, the excitement on his face immediately turned into endless anxiety. It was too fast. These people had died too fast. In the shadow stone that Yuhuan Tianzuan had given to Tobagwe, Xianxia's cultivation was only at the peak of soul formation. But with this speed, how could an Empyrean achieve it? From the beginning to the end, Tobagwe did not know what realm the enemy he was facing was at. Yuhuan Tianzuan had lied to him, saying that Xianxia was only a gatekeeper and that the pure sky saint ancestor was the culprit behind the imprisonment of Tiandu. For this reason, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not hesitate to make a heart demon oath to deceive Tobagwe. Tobagwe believed it. So he stood on Yuhuan Tianzuan's side. But now that things had come to this, it was useless to say so much. He could only blame himself for being greedy. He did not go to Earth to investigate in advance and listen to Yuhuan Tianzuan's side of the story. So even if Tobagwe regretted at this moment that he should not have believed Yuhuan Tianzuan's bewitchment, he had no choice but to release the arrow. Hurry! Hurry! He's going to kill us. Tobagwe stood at the bow of the ship and shouted crazily. While he was extremely anxious, how could Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan not be extremely nervous as well? Both sides were competing for time. Tobagwe had done everything he could. If he could not break through the array now, when Xianxia was free, how would Tiandu deal with his anger? So Yuhuan Tianzuan's heart was not as relaxed as Tobagwe's. Under his command, after the Tiandu people failed to break through the array for the third time, Yuhuan Tianzuan finally could not help but look up to the sky and roar. Then he threw out the jade disc glass cup in his hand. The jade disc glass cup was a top treasure left behind by the pure sky saint ancestor. After Yuhuan Tianzuan ascended to the position of Empyrean, he used his own blood essence to refine this magic treasure. So this magic treasure had long been related to his life. In the past, Yuhuan Tianzuan would never have been willing to detonate this rare treasure. But at this time he had no other choice. Therefore, after throwing out the jade disc glass cup in his hand, Yuhuan Tianzuan directly formed a seal. Bang! The moment the jade disc glass cup hit the array, the entire moon seemed to tremble. This supreme magic treasure that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years finally completed its final mission at this moment. From now on, the name of the three lanterns of heaven, earth and man would only exist in legends. Under Yuhuan Tianzuan's unscrupulous attack, the array suddenly collapsed, turning into a burst of smoke and dissipating. Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan forcefully endured the impact to his divine soul from detonating his natal magic treasure. He turned around to look at the divine generals and star venerables behind him before abruptly swinging his sleeves and ordering everyone, "Let's go." Then, with Yuhuan Tianzuan as the leader, the remnants of Tiandu rushed to the giant ship that carried their future. At the same time, Xianxia, who was on Earth, also sensed everything. The moment the array was destroyed, he instinctively wanted to chase after them and stop them. But the raging fire in the city below made him stop in his tracks. Although he was confident that he could stop Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan's group, it was possible that those damned bastards would burn down another populous city. How to make a choice had really become a big problem. Xianxia was really hesitant. But at this moment, a voice that was not inferior to the sound of nature suddenly rang in his ears. "Mr. Qin, I'm here to help you." Hearing this, Xianxia quickly looked back. He saw that Jiang Yan was hurrying in his direction with 300 divine generals from Daiyu Island. The strength of Daiyu Island was not bad. Not only were they all golden core cultivators, but there were also many Yuanying among them. Therefore, as soon as Zhang Yan and his people appeared, Xianxia could not help but smile. Good that you're here. I owe you today and I'll repay you in the future. Hearing Xianxia's words, this cunning old man could not help but laugh. Sir, you don't have to do this. The divine land gave birth to us. Now that our homeland is in danger, how can we stand by and do nothing? At this point, Jiang Yan suddenly changed the topic and asked in a probing tone, Sir, you seem to have something urgent to deal with? Why don't you leave this to us first? Those bastards are just divine generals. Why do you need to do it yourself? Then I'll leave this to you. I'll be right back. Before her voice fell, Xianxia's entire person had already completely turned into a stream of light, instantly disappearing before Jiang Yan's eyes. Seeing this, Jiang Yan could not help but smile faintly. He looked at the sky thoughtfully, then waved his sleeves gently and calmly ordered the people behind him, Go, hurry up. Yes. Chapter 489. Yuhuan Tianzuan used the glass cup as the price and finally succeeded in breaking the array. At that moment the most excited one was not Yuhuan Tianzuan, but Tobague, who had been waiting anxiously. Quick, quick, quick. Tobague stood at the bow of the ship and kept waving to everyone. In fact, at this time, why would he need to urge them? After the formation was broken, with Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan in the lead, the remaining several thousand people in Tiandu rushed toward the enormous star Cha in a grandiose manner. This was the third time Tiandu had to move. For the arrogant divine generals and star monarchs, when had they ever been in such a sorry state? Therefore, after everyone boarded the ship, they each found a corner and waited silently for the starship to start. The morale was a little low. But thinking about it, it was understandable. After all, Xianxia was like a dark cloud hanging over everyone's head. As long as they didn't escape from his clutches, this dark cloud would continue to bring endless trouble to people. Venerable, is everyone here? After Yuhuan Tianzuan boarded the ship, Tobague immediately put on a warm smile. Looking at his current flattering appearance, where was the calmness when bargaining with Yuhuan Tianzuan? Instead, he was more like a waiter in a tea house. This was the reality. It must be known that the sealed Yuhuan Tianzuan and the freed Yuhuan Tianzuan were two completely different concepts. Tobague was very smart and of course he was also very sensible. Since Yuhuan Tianzuan had been freed, then the resentment that made him angry should naturally all turn into clouds and dissipate with the wind. So, Tobague instantly adjusted his mentality. From now on, his fate would be closely related to Yuhuan Tianzuan in front of him. And Emperor Yuhuan seemed to be very satisfied with Tobague's change from arrogance to respect. He nodded gently and after looking thoughtfully at the blue planet in the distance, he directly ordered to Tobague, There's no time to lose, let's go. Yes. After receiving Yuhuan Tianzuan's order, Tobague immediately rushed to the rudder, and then directly inserted the high-grade spirit stone that he had prepared in advance. With the continuous influx of spirit energy, the huge starship suddenly trembled slightly. Tobague turned the rudder, adjusted the direction and shouted to everyone, We are about to set sail, please sit tight. At that moment Tobague was like Columbus returning from a rewarding journey. Although he had lost hundreds of loyal followers, compared to the harvest of this trip, what was that loss? As long as he successfully brought Yuhuan Tianzuan and the others back to Supreme Palace enclosure, then he would be the greatest meritorious service. What kind of impact would this have on the current situation of the Supreme Palace enclosure? Thinking of this, he couldn't help himself. But what Tobague didn't. Just as he gripped the rudder and was about to set off, a terrifying pressure that caused one's heart to palpitate suddenly came from afar. The strength of this pressure was enough to make one's legs go soft. What's more, there was obviously a monstrous killing intent. What's going on? Tobague was startled by this killing intent that seemed to have materialized into reality. After reacting, he wanted to control the starship enclosure to directly perform a space jump. But unfortunately, before the starship enclosure could perform a space jump, it must be in a high-speed flying state. So Tobague could only push the starship enclosure with all his strength, hoping to escape from this terrible place as soon as possible. The starship enclosure needed to be accelerated before it could perform a space jump. But Xianxia, who had already mastered the true meaning of the word void, didn't need to. Therefore, after a few breaths of time, his figure had already appeared not far behind the starship enclosure, and was clearly reflected in the eyes of everyone on the ship. In everyone's sight, Xianxia arrived suddenly on 10,000 swords, like a soaring dragon roaming in the void, like the Milky Way hanging upside down on 3 stone beams. Before he arrived, the strong and unparalleled pressure on his body had already pressed everyone to the point of suffocation. At that moment, a nightmare seemed to have become a reality. Everyone listened to my order, array. Unlike Tobague, who was at a loss, Yuhuan Tianzuan was obviously mentally prepared to be caught up by Xianxia in advance. Therefore, as soon as Xianxia appeared, everyone on the ship launched an attack at him at the same time. In an instant, a dense amount of true yuan qi shot out like laser cannons, bringing along a dazzling stream of light as it smashed towards Xianxia. Whether it was a Star Lord or a divine general, everyone couldn't wait to use all their skills in an instant, only hoping that everyone could work together to strangle this terrible enemy here. In the face of so many people attacking at the same time, even Xianxia didn't dare to face them head-on. Therefore, his figure flashed and suddenly disappeared from everyone's sight. Where's he? Where did he go? The killing move that everyone on the ship had been preparing for a long time missed just like that. No one knew where Xianxia had gone, so they subconsciously turned their heads to look for her. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately raised his arms and shouted, "Don't panic. Careful. Don't let down your guard. Although this person's cultivation is high, we have many people in Tiandu. He definitely won't dare to fight us head-on, so he can only hide in the dark and wait for an opportunity to sneak attack, trying to defeat us one by one. Everyone, don't be distracted, don't fall into his tricks." After Yuhuan Tianzuan said this, everyone calmed down, so they released their divine sense, hoping to find Xianxi's trace in the first place. At this time, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly turned around and asked Tobague anxiously, "How long will it take?" 3 breaths. Only 3 breaths. Note: 1 breath is about 2 to 3 seconds. Tobague gave a very positive reply. Xianxia had been accelerating. As long as she successfully accelerated to the state of space jump, then even if Xianxia was a supreme, he wouldn't be able to attack them in this state. In fact, from the moment he saw Tobague, Yuhuan Tianzuan had already made various plans in his heart. According to Tobague's description, there should be many supreme-level existences in Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, if Xianxia was really determined to pursue and beat them up today, Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan would at most drag the battlefield to Supreme Palace enclosure. He didn't believe that no one could stop Xianxia. Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan had calculated everything, but the only thing he hadn't expected was, in order to kill him, Xianxia didn't even hesitate to make a heart demon oath. Therefore, the moment he talked to Tobague, Xianxi's figure appeared from the void. This was the anger from Wuxia's bloodline. Of all the things Emperor Yuhuan shouldn't have done, the thing he shouldn't have done the most was to treat the lives of mortals as grass. As he had to die. The moment Xianxia appeared, the long sword in his hand drew a cold light in the air. Moonlight Sword Art, 3rd Style, 10,000 Swords returned to origin. Xianxi's appearance was very sudden. Besides Yuhuan Tianzuan, who was closest to him, almost no one reacted. Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan instinctively wanted to block it. But what he never thought was, Xianxi's sword tip didn't point directly at him, but at the side. Tobague. Chapter 490. First of all, Xianxia could barely be regarded as a magic weapon. Especially this kind of large Xianxia, it needed the master's blood essence to feed it. After it was completely refined, it could be controlled at will. Therefore, the first thing Xianxia wanted to kill was not Yuhuan Tianzuan but Tobague. In addition, there was also an analogy here. If Xianxia was compared to a tiger, then Tiandu's group was naturally a flock of sheep. In terms of individual combat strength, a sheep could never be a tiger's opponent. But if thousands of sheep charged at the same time, even a ferocious tiger would have to obediently retreat to the side. The strength of an individual could never be compared to the strength of a group. Therefore, Xianxia could only use a sneak attack to drag the sheep out of the flock one by one, and then kill them one by one. From the beginning, Xianxi's goal was very clear. So as soon as he appeared, he perfectly displayed the strength of a supreme being. Moonlight Sword Art, 3rd Move, 10,000 Swords returned to origin. The long sword behind Xianxia was like a giant dragon. After emerging from the void, it smashed down at Tobague at an extremely fast speed. Its speed was fast and its momentum was spectacular. It was like a waterfall that swallowed mountains and rivers. In an instant, it brought a huge suffocating pressure to everyone present. Tobagwe was in the center of the vortex. His feeling was naturally more profound than others. And it was precisely because of this. As soon as Xianxia appeared, Tobagwe keenly felt that he was locked on by Xianxia's aura. So he immediately raised all the vital essence in his body and forcibly propped up a protective aura shield. At the same time, he did not forget to urgently send a voice transmission to Yuhuan Tianzuan. "Venerable, save me." At this moment, Tobagwe really regretted it. Xianxia did not care about Emperor Yuhuan and instead made a special trip to find trouble with him, a small fry. Wasn't it obvious that he wanted to kill him, then seize control of the Xianxia and finally slowly kill everyone on the ship? And at this time, if Tobagwe still didn't know Xianxia's true strength, then he really would be too stupid. Supreme martial artist. This was a living supreme being. He was in big trouble today. In just a flash, tens of thousands of swords smashed into Tobagwe's protective astral shield. He didn't even have time to react before he spat out a large mouthful of blood from the shockwave of the true qi. Poof! His protective shield shattered with the sound. Tobagwe's eyes flashed with despair. A mirthless smile suddenly appeared on his face. Just what did he, Tobagwe, deserve to die under the sovereign's sword today? Thinking about it carefully, this seemed to be a kind of honor. Humans would always have some different feelings before they died. Tobagwe had already mentally prepared himself. But at this critical juncture, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him and risked his life to block this fatal blow for him. Of course, this person couldn't be Tuoba Xiu. Moreover, Tuoba Xiu didn't have such ability. Therefore, when this person risked his life to block this blow for Tobagwe, even Xianxia couldn't help but show a trace of surprise. At that moment, time seemed to stand still. The focus of the audience was on this figure. This person, wasn't it Yuhuan Tianzuan? No one could smoothly block the full blow of a supreme martial artist. Yuhuan Tianzuan was no exception. Therefore, the moment the tens of thousands of swords arrived, the energy around Yuhuan Tianzuan's body suddenly stagnated. The protective shield also cracked and collapsed. In front of an insightful Void Realm expert, a Divine Transformation Realm expert had no ability to resist. But even so, Yuhuan Tianzuan had no intention of retreating. He looked up to the sky and roared. The defensive magic weapon on his body suddenly bloomed with a burst of brilliant light. Even if a supreme martial artist is above, I will not retreat half a step. In an instant, the body of the 10 celestial sovereigns who had been in a high position for a long time, burst out with a tenacious fighting spirit that didn't fear death. Bang! 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 10,000 swords returned to origin was very different from other moves. This move's sword chi was vigorous and long. After the move was released, it was like a huge wave. Wave after wave bombarded the enemy's body continuously until the attack was completely eliminated. Under such a violent collision, the people on the ship naturally reacted at this moment. Then they spontaneously attacked Xianxia. Seeing that things were not going well, Xianxia could only hurriedly withdraw his true essence and then escape into the void again. This was the method of an insightful emptiness. His movements were erratic and formless, making it impossible for others to detect his presence. When Xianxia disappeared like this, the people no longer attacked randomly. Instead, they rushed forward like a swarm of bees and hurriedly protected Yuhuan Tianzuan in the center. Seeing that Yuhuan Tianzuan's situation was not very good, Celestial Sovereign Xuanzhen immediately stepped forward to support him. Then he asked with concern, "Yuhuan, are you okay?" "I'm fine." Yuhuan Tianzuan clearly suffered a heavy blow from Xianxia, but at this moment, it was as if nothing had happened. Other than his pale face, Celestial Sovereign Xuanzhen could not see any injuries on his body. Celestial Sovereign Xuanzhen seemed to want to ask something. However, Yuhuan Tianzuan directly waved his hand and quickly ordered the people, "Formation. The crisis is not over yet. Don't be distracted." As expected, before Yuhuan Tianzuan's voice died away, Xianxia's figure once again appeared in front of everyone's eyes. He had missed the best opportunity when he missed his attack just now. At present, most of the remaining Heaven Capital troops were concentrated near the rudder. Even Xianxia did not have the confidence to break their formation in an instant. Therefore, he could only move to the stern of the ship and concentrate all his true essence on his hand. This time, he did not use a sword. Instead, he chose a saber that he did not use often. The sword was nimble and the saber was strong and fierce. Great clumsiness turned into simplicity. One saber was enough. The third move of the flaming sun saber technique. One saber cleaving the sky. They saw. The moment Xianxia appeared, he was already holding the saber with both hands. The tip of the saber was pointed at the sky. Such a powerful move, even if it had not been used yet, its power could not be concealed. When Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan sensed the commotion, his expression immediately changed. He shouted fiercely at the crowd, "Quick! Stop him!" Hearing this, everyone turned around, wanting to launch a joint attack on Xianxia again. But could their speed be faster than Xianxia? So the moment everyone turned around, Xianxia drew his saber. At that moment, he was like a god descending, proudly standing above all living beings. Man and saber became one. The saber aura suddenly came into being as if it was going to destroy everything in its path. It made it impossible for people to avoid it. This was the simplest, most direct, and also the most unfancy saber. With an unparalleled domineering aura, it slashed towards the incomparably huge Xianxia. Didn't Yu Huan Tianzuan want to ride Xianxia to Supreme Palace enclosure? Since he couldn't kill Tobague, he might as well destroy this ship. As long as Xianxia was destroyed with the flying speed of Yu Huan Tianzuan and the others, when would they be able to fly to Supreme Palace enclosure? The journey to the stars is long and the sky is high. Don't worry, I will play with you slowly. Chapter 491. 3 breaths. It took less than 10 seconds. After Yu Huan Tianzuan sacrificed himself to block Qianxi's attack for Tobague, who had narrowly escaped death, pinned all his hopes on Xianxia. At that moment, Tobague only felt that his mind was blank. Everything in the outside world seemed to have nothing to do with him anymore. The only thing that could attract his attention was this faintly fluorescent high-grade spirit stone in front of him. As long as this high-grade spirit stone in front of him suddenly bloomed, it meant that Xianxia could perform a space jump. 1 breath. 2 breaths. 3 breaths. When Tobague exhaled a mouthful of turbid air for the 3rd time, his eyes suddenly burst with a burst of light, and the excitement on his face was even more indescribable. However, what Tobague didn't know was, just as he was excited, Qianxi, who was standing proudly at the stern of the ship, also slashed out with the long saber in his hand. Red Sun Saber Technique's 3rd move. 1 saber cleaves the sky. This was a saber condensed from the true essence of a Dongshu stage cultivator. Qianxi hadn't even slashed out, but this saber light was already like a pillar supporting the sky, instantly increasing by hundreds of times. In terms of length, it was even much longer than the huge Xianxia in front of him. "Break for me!" Qianxi roared, and he finally slashed out with the saber in his hand. This saber light drew a perfect arc in the air at a speed that was difficult to see with the naked eye. It flashed from top to bottom. Its speed was so fast that it made people speechless. The people on the ship didn't even have time to react before the saber light flashed past their eyes. "It's over." Yu Huan Tianzuan watched all this happen, but he was powerless to stop it. But just when he was in despair, a burst of extremely strong light suddenly bloomed in front of Yu Huan Tianzuan's eyes. The light was so dazzling that it was even brighter than the afternoon sun. At that moment, time stood still. It was truly still. Because Xianxia had successfully entered the space jump state. Too late. Qianxi had always been outside Xianxia's defensive array formation, so when Xianxia performed the space jump, she did not bring him along with her. Therefore he could only watch as Xianxia turned into a ray of light and disappeared from his sight. The entire world finally quieted down. Qianxi turned his head to look at Mars, which was not far away from him, and then turned back to look in the direction of Earth. The azure blue planet was still floating there quietly. This scene was very familiar to Qianxi. Just like the day he returned, this azure planet was also quietly floating there. At that time, Nian was only a little over 4 years old. In the blink of an eye, Nian was almost 7 years old. That's right, when this spring is over and summer comes again, Nian was 7 years old. A second ago, Qianxi was still busy killing people, but in the next second she suddenly thought of her daughter. Just like that, Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan and the others slipped away right in front of him. However, he didn't seem to be in a hurry at all. Instead, he was like a lunatic as he floated in space and laughed foolishly. But the good thing was, his gaffe did not last long. After raising his hand and making a flying kiss gesture toward Earth, Qianxi immediately put away the smile on his face. "Nian, wait for me, Dad will be back soon." After saying that, Xianxia took a deep look at the azure blue planet in front of him, then immediately turned around and followed the law threads left behind by Xianxia. Run to where? So what if he ran to the ends of the earth? He had to keep his word. If he said he would kill your whole family, he would definitely kill your whole family. Otherwise, how could Xianxia continue to live? Unlike Chenghua and Yizhi, the two brats who ran away from home, Tobagwe brought enough high-grade spirit stones on this trip. Therefore, after successfully getting rid of Xianxia, Tobagwe did not stop for a moment. Every time Xianxia completed a jump, he would immediately replace it with a new high-grade spirit stone. After Xianxia completed the 7th jump, Tobagwe finally breathed a sigh of relief. He turned around and announced to everyone, "Everyone, we are home." Tobagwe probably emphasized the word, home. Naturally, there was no need to explain the meaning behind his words. "We're home." Hearing this, everyone on the ship could not help but look at each other. Just a second ago they were still struggling under the shadow of Xianxia. How did they suddenly reach their destination in the next second? So fast. You don't have to doubt, please look. This is the Supreme Palace enclosure. After saying that, Tobagwe came to the guardrail, then smiled and pointed to a place not far ahead. A continental plate quietly floating in the universe. If the universe was compared to the sea and the earth was compared to a basketball, then this continent was a small sampan in the sea. This was the Supreme Palace enclosure. An existence that seriously violated the common sense of physics. However, its existence also indirectly proved that the ancient people's conjecture was correct. That is, the sky was round and the earth was round. The Supreme Palace enclosure did not have a sea. At the end of the land was the boundless void of the universe. In addition, although the Supreme Palace enclosure was not a planet, it still had a layer of complex cloud structure similar to the atmosphere. Therefore, looking from a distance from Xianxia, it was actually more like a landscape rockery of a rich family. However, the area of this rockery was much larger than the earth. It was at least twice the size of the earth. Moreover, it did not have a large area occupied by the sea. The Supreme Palace enclosure has been divided into 9 provinces since ancient times: Shang, Han, Ning, Zhong, Lan, Wan, Yu, Yun, and Lei. My Tuoba family comes from the northernmost Ning province of the Supreme Palace enclosure. There is a saying, Ning province is in the north, Tuoba town is in the south. It means that my Tuoba family is in the south of Ning province. At such a close distance it was impossible to use a space jump. Therefore, Tobagwe took advantage of this time to take the initiative to introduce the general situation of the Supreme Palace enclosure to Yuhuan Tianzuan. And when mentioning the Tuoba family, Tobagwe's entire state faintly changed. Thinking about it, was this the feeling of finding an organization? Tobagwe tried to introduce the strength of the Tuoba family to bring a certain amount of pressure to Yuhuan Tianzuan so that Yuhuan Tianzuan would have no choice but to pay attention to him. But what he didn't expect was, even if the Supreme Palace enclosure was close at hand, Yuhuan Tianzuan's attention had not been on him. Instead, he looked back from time to time to look behind Xianxia. Seeing this, Tobagwe couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. He finally remembered that he was still being chased by a supreme powerhouse. Just now, I deliberately chose the wrong direction to jump back and forth twice. It should be impossible for them to catch up so quickly, right? A reply came from home saying that the patriarch is personally bringing people to support. As long as the patriarch arrives, my little life should be saved, right? Seeing that Yuhuan Tianzuan was not in the mood to talk, Tobagwe also obediently shut his mouth. At this time, there was a sudden movement from the stern of the ship, so that everyone on the ship was like a bird startled by the twang of a bow. They were so scared that they all put on an attack posture. Gotcha! Everyone focused their eyes and saw that the Xianxia was suddenly divided into 2. The entire stern of the ship was cut off. It turned out that Xianxi's saber was not ineffective. It was just that at that time Xianxia had already reached the critical point of the space jump. So even if Xianxia had been cut in half, she still successfully reached the Supreme Palace enclosure. It was a false alarm, it's fine, it's fine. Tobagwe was frightened out of his wits. After recovering, he immediately laughed and signaled everyone not to be nervous. If it was destroyed, so be it. Anyway, he was already at this position. Even if he flew slowly, it wouldn't take long to reach his destination. Chapter 492. I'm very puzzled. Why is there more and more rhythm recently? Is it the first day that I started to update every day? If I remember correctly, I've already updated every day for half a year, and there were 4 months in between where I updated every 2 days. Of course, I can understand. Saying that I'm slow is actually a disguised form of urging me to update. Covering face shyly. So, I want to thank everyone for their continuous support. Every comment, every monthly vote, every recommendation ticket, every tip you gave me. Actually, I've seen it all and remembered it in my heart. Now let's talk about the reason for updating every day. My reason is actually very good. Thus, I want to improve. From the external data, this book seems to be completely dead. But my royalties didn't decrease at all. Because of the channel bonus. If I update one more chapter every day, my monthly income will increase by at least 1 to 20,000. I'm not saying this to show off, but to prove I'm really not writing books for money. I just want to write better. If it's to make money, then from the day this book was published, my word count skyrocketed. My annual income is at least 500,000 if not 1 million. I need to announce the results here. This book's current average order is 11,000, but the high order has reached 60,000. This 60,000 does not only refer to a single chapter, but it refers to the nearly 30 chapters that started to be published. After that, it began to plummet. 50,000, 40,000, 30,000, 20,000, 10,000, and now more than 1,000. It will probably continue to fall. I'm not writing well. But I did write well before I published it. Actually, I'm not very satisfied with the chapters before I published it. Because at that time I made a lot of rookie mistakes, but I'm too lazy to change them. Then here's the question. Why did I write so well in the beginning but the latter part is so bad? The answer is actually very simple. Because this is my first book that exceeds 1 million words. I can say without reservation, for more than a year I've really put in a lot of effort. But my ability is limited. I've never had any long experience before. At most, I wrote 400,000 words. When I published it, it exceeded this number. So, I've been stumbling along the way. Once half a step to become a god. Now it's completely dead. Can you guess how wonderful the journey of my heart is? I don't blame anyone, I don't even blame myself. Because I'm very clear, I really don't have the ability. My first book was published in 2005 at starting point. During this period he kept writing, but he still couldn't reach the standard of signing a contract. It was only when he wrote this book that he seemed to have had an epiphany and suddenly became famous. So don't compete with me in terms of reading volume, and don't act all high and mighty in front of me. Because I really thought it was ridiculous. Let's not talk about those that we've seen before, for example the most popular ones recently. Haunted House, Machinist, Best Friend, Best Son-in-Law. Even when the lifestyle game was just released, I could already guess that it had 10,000 subscribers when it only had 80,000 words. But reading a book and writing a book were two different things. He had clearly thought of the plot in his head, but when he wrote it out, the flavor would always change. This was the so-called power of the brush. I had absolutely no control over what I wanted to write. This was also the main reason why many rookies couldn't even sign a contract. All this time I've been thinking about it over and over. Think about how to improve yourself. To be honest, I've improved a lot. After all, he had been writing for so many years. His basic skills were still very solid. Now that he had the experience of 10,000 orders, if he didn't improve, then wouldn't he be a fool? But because the framework of cultivation dad had already been established, I couldn't express it at all. I could only continue writing according to the existing framework. Writing a book was actually like building a house. The foundation of this book was clearly the foundation of a villa. But after I built the foundation, I simply built a straw shed on top of it. Now, I didn't want to live in a straw shed. I wanted to build a villa on top of the straw shed. Then, other than tearing it down and rebuilding it, was there any other way? This was writing a book. Many people would choose to tear down the bridge and rebuild it. I was different. Since I couldn't live in a villa, I would renovate the straw shed. That was my idea. It was such a simple idea that it was somewhat inexplicable. And this was also the fundamental reason why I continued to persevere. Because I had once stood at the top of the mountain, I saw a different scenery. Now I had fallen to the bottom of the valley. But because of that unexpected experience, I couldn't help but look at the top of the mountain. The mountain man asked me, "Do you have hatred in your heart?" I answered, "No hatred." Then he asked, "Why?" At that moment my answer was so firm. "Thank you for letting me see the scenery at the top of the mountain. If I fell, then so be it. I'll just walk again. But the next time, I want to walk more steadily. Slower, more steadily." That was all. March 3, 2019 early morning. The west window opened. Oh right, this isn't a eunuch's declaration. The sun will rise as usual tomorrow, the west window will be as usual. Wax, love you guys. Chapter 493. Formation. As soon as he heard these words, Tobagwe was so scared that he began to tremble. He looked in the direction that Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan was pointing at and saw that a beam of light had appeared diagonally above Xianxia at some point in time. Furthermore, it was rapidly flying in their direction. From a distance, this light was like a meteor. After drawing a beautiful straight line in the sky, it directly smashed in front of everyone. Bang! Before the person arrived, the sword arrived. Sure enough, it was Qinshi chasing after them again. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not seem to be very surprised. His face turned cold and then he ordered everyone in a loud voice, 5 divine generals, take your positions. Activate the innate 5 direction flags and set up the heavenly cycle stars formation. Rise. As soon as this order came out, there was a small commotion on the ship. What needed to be mentioned here was, after the Battle of Dragon Head Peak, the 5 divine generals of Tiandu and the Rakshasa Star Lord had lost a lot of people, so Yuhuan Tianzuan could only temporarily choose suitable successors from the existing survivors. These people's strength was not bad, but they had not undergone systematic training, so the moment they heard Yuhuan Tianzuan's order, they seemed a little flustered. To think that our Huang Tiandu, to think that he would end up without a successor, it's really lamentable. Looking at the clumsy positioning of these divine generals and star lords, Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen could not help but sigh. Hearing this, the faces of the 6 heavenly lords, including Yuhuan Tianzuan, flashed with a trace of sadness. Once upon a time Tiandu was so glorious and strong. But now, the remnants of Tiandu, led by the 10 directions heavenly lords, had become stray dogs at this moment. In order to avoid Qinshi's pursuit, they were in a state of panic all day long. When they were still in the solar system, the heavenly lords did not feel that there was anything wrong with escaping to the Supreme Palace enclosure. But when they really came to the Supreme Palace enclosure and saw it floating quietly in the void, the celestial venerables suddenly felt a sense of helplessness from being outlanders. Yes, Earth was their home. It was just like how Tobagwe's home was in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Now that he had finally returned to the Supreme Palace enclosure, he would naturally be excited. This feeling of desolation was probably the so-called alone as a stranger in a strange land. Morale was low. At this time Yuhuan Tianzuan seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly asked Tuoba Su, how long until the reinforcements arrive? Hearing this, Tobagwe was startled. He didn't seem to understand why Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't ask him directly, but instead asked him secretly. However, doubts were just doubts. Tobagwe honestly replied to Yuhuan Tianzuan with a sound transmission. The family has already given a clear reply and the family head is on the way with people. According to my estimation, we'll be able to see the reinforcements in 30 minutes at most. Good. Then we'll hold on for another incense stick's worth of time. Yuhuan Tianzuan nodded calmly at Tobagwe, then turned around and flew to the side of the high platform. He lowered his head and looked around the audience, then suddenly let out a long roar towards the sky, angrily roaring, hateful. Even if we abandon our home and flee to a foreign land, the thief is not willing to let us live. We have been forced into a corner. So I've decided, instead of being trampled on and humiliated like this, it's better to go all out and fight to the death with that evil thief. Yuhuan is here to ask everyone, today, are you willing to fight with me? As soon as these words came out, the audience boiled over. Before, everyone was busy running for their lives so they couldn't raise any morale. Now that they had come to the Supreme Palace enclosure, this strange place in front of them seemed to give them infinite courage. That's right. They had even lost their home, so what was the use of keeping their lives? Where was the integrity of Tiandu? Where was the glory of Tiandu? After thinking of their last trace of dignity, everyone's fighting spirit was immediately summoned by Yuhuan Tianzuan. Fight! 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 The moment the massive heavenly cycle star formation was set up, a silver-white shield suddenly appeared around Xianxia, protecting her within. In fact, this formation was not a killing formation, but more like an auxiliary formation. Its biggest function was to connect everyone in the formation together, so that their vital essences could be intertwined and converge to achieve the purpose of glory and glory. No, the power of the formation has decreased by at least 30% after losing the central Wuji apricot yellow flag. Let me be the eye of the formation. After saying that, Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen prepared to move to the lost corner. However, at this moment, Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan pulled him back without batting an eyelid and then shook his head slightly. What's wrong? Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen, who had always been straightforward, was confused. Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell, who was next to him, directly pulled him to his side and softly explained to him. What? After hearing Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell's explanation, Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen's expression was interesting. It turned out that Yuhuan Tianzuan wanted his subordinates to block the attack for him. Who did Qinshi really want to kill? Wasn't it the Heavenly Lords present? As the leaders of Heaven Capital, the 7 of them were the real culprits that caused Earth to suffer. Since the 7 of them were no match for Qinshi, then the best way. Obviously, they wanted their subordinates to block the attack. Now that the 7 of them were in the center of the formation, if Qinshi wanted to successfully kill them, he had to break through the formation first. However, the formation connected everyone's lives tightly together. As the saying goes, unity is strength. If Qinshi was determined to kill them, then he would kill everyone present first. It was just that these silly heavenly generals and starlords had been betrayed by Yuhuan Tianzuan without realizing it. Instead, they firmly believed that they were fighting for their dignity. It was just like the slogan they chanted: everything was for the prestige of the Holy Ancestor, everything was for the glory of Heaven Capital. With the appearance of Qinshi, the final battle between him and Heaven Capital finally began. The remaining half of Xianxia was still flying in the universe. The fairy-like Supreme Palace enclosure was not far ahead. However, this last stretch of distance, it turned this Xianxia into a purgatory on Earth. Qinshi attacked fiercely again and again, but the formation dissolved them into nothingness time and time again. It was true that he was a supreme. However, in such a short period of time, even a supreme was somewhat helpless in the face of such a tenacious resistance from everyone. Qinshi was somewhat confused. What was wrong with these people? Why did they suddenly become so fearless of death? As soon as he showed himself, all sorts of magical treasures and spells would be thrown at him. He slashed at the formation's shield again and again. With every slash, the violent impact caused by the collision of true essence would be instantly dispersed to everyone. In the face of such frequent attacks, those with lower cultivation would be shaken to the point that their heart meridians would be broken and their 7 orifices would bleed. Even so, every time someone could not withstand the strong impact brought about by Qinshi, they would immediately rush out of the formation and use their last breath to detonate their golden core, temporarily relieving some pressure on their companions behind them. The 7 celestial venerables stood on the high platform and watched everything in front of them. Although he could not bear it, Celestial Venerable Xuanzhen finally listened to Celestial Venerable Wondrous Spell's dissuasion. He stood on the high platform with the other Celestial Venerables and constantly pretended to gesture. Those who could cultivate to this level were not fools. Even ants wanted to live, so how could the Celestial Venerables not want to live? After all, they were the core of Heaven Capital, and at the same time, they were the future spark of Heaven Capital. As long as they could force Qinshi to retreat and successfully enter the Supreme Palace enclosure, then Heaven Capital would usher in a new era. In the process of Xianxia flying to the Supreme Palace enclosure, the remnants of Heaven Capital fell one after another. Every time they self-destructed, it was like a festive firework, shining non-stop in this silent universe. After enduring for 3 breaths, another incense stick of time welcomed. Finally, after nearly half of the people on the ship were gone, a ray of light finally appeared in Yuhuan Tianzuan's eyes. Venerable One, look. That's the Tuoba family's flag. We're saved. Chapter 494. While the remnants of Tiandu were struggling to resist Qinshi's attack, Tobague's cry of, "We are saved," was no less exciting than a stimulant. Hearing this, Empyrean Yuhuan hurriedly turned his head and looked in the direction Tobague was pointing, only to see dozens of star carts flying over at an extremely fast speed. When these starships approached, Yuhuan Tianzuan finally saw the flag of the Tuoba family hanging high on the mast of the main ship. The flag was very exquisite and was definitely not ordinary. There were 2 words written on it, and the flag was embroidered with sea-water patterns and clouds. It seemed to imply that the Tuoba family had a long and prosperous history. The reinforcements Tobague had been waiting for, They had finally arrived. There were a total of 24 starships that came to support. When they were about to approach the location of Tobague's group, these starships immediately took the lead with the main ship, and the rest split into two sides and spread out in a goose formation. Looking at their momentum, there was a faint air of military formation. Seeing this, Xianxia temporarily withdrew his true essence and then quietly floated in the void, as if he wanted to see why this group of people had come. Your Excellency is Mr. Qin? Tuoba Yi is here. Greetings, sir. After the starships stopped, a figure flew out at an extremely fast speed and then went straight to Xianxia. The two faced each other in space. Xianxia sized up the other party and the other party sized him up at the same time. This man who claimed to be the head of the Tuoba family had a cultivation base around the middle stage of divine transformation, which should be at the same level as Yuhuan Tianzuan. Perhaps because he knew that his cultivation base was far lower than Xianxia. As soon as Tuoba Yi appeared, he took the initiative to respectfully greet Xianxia. Xianxia naturally knew why Tuoba Yi had come. Therefore he didn't even bother to waste time with the other party. After waving his hand indifferently, Xianxia said coldly, "Since I have chased you all the way here today, I have already made it clear that I will never let this matter go. Get out of the way. You can't stop me." After saying that, Xianxia's figure disappeared from Tuoba Yi's sight. By the time Tuoba Yi came back to his senses, Xianxia had already caught up with the dilapidated Xianxia in front of him and continued to demolish it. Bang! When the sword light emitted by Xianxia once again collided with the large array, a strong wave of true essence instantly set off in the void. At that moment, the joy of seeing the reinforcements immediately fell to the bottom of the valley. Even though the Tuoba family's reinforcements had arrived, the situation didn't seem to have improved. Xianxia was still attacking the formation. Everyone was still struggling to hold on under his attacks. Inside the array, Yuhuan Tianzuan and the others looked at the sky with stern expressions. At this point they could only place all their hopes on Tuoba Yi. They could only hope that everything was as Tuoba Gui said, that the Tuoba family was willing to offend a supreme in exchange for the alliance of the entire heaven capital. Otherwise, Yuhuan Tianzuan could only use his own method to deal with the catastrophe in front of him. "Mr. Qin, can you stop and listen to me?" Xianxia's reaction was completely out of Tuoba Yi's expectations. It was true that Xianxia was a supreme. However, Tuoba Yi was not bad either. As the leader of the Tuoba family, Tuoba Yi represented the entire Tuoba family's will. Seeing Xianxia's unreasonable and ruthless way of doing things, it seemed that he didn't put him in his eyes at all. Tuoba Yi's face darkened and he had to quickly change his plan. Thus, he came in front of Xianxia again and suddenly opened his arms, as if he wanted to stop Xianxia from continuing to attack Xianxia. "You want to die?" Seeing this, Xianxia did not hesitate. He raised the long sword in his hand and slashed at the array again. Not to mention Tuoba Yi, even if the entire Tuoba family stood in front of him today, he would still eat Yuhuan Tianzuan alive. There was no way to talk. There was really no way to talk. Seeing that Xianxia was treating him like he didn't exist, Tuoba Yi seemed to be a little angry. Thus, Tuoba Yi's eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of fierceness, and then he took out a fan-like thing from his arms. Swoosh! As soon as this magic treasure was taken out, Xianxia noticed a trace of unusual energy fluctuation from it. He originally left some leeway, intending to give Tuoba Yi a chance to stay out of this. But since Tuoba Yi was so unappreciative, then don't blame him for being merciless. Therefore, the moment Tuoba Yi took out the folding fan, the long sword in Xianxia's hand suddenly emitted a dazzling light, and then with an unparalleled power, it directly slashed at Tuoba Yi in front of him. Bang! There was no air in space, so naturally sound couldn't be transmitted. With a flash of light, a strong shock wave with true essence as the medium suddenly spread out. Wherever the shock wave went, the meteorites immediately turned into dust and completely disappeared in this vast universe. The star Cha where the people of Tiandu were on was closest to the explosion, so the impact of this star Cha was naturally the strongest. Under such a huge impact, this star Cha was shaken and rolled quickly. After rolling for thousands of meters away, it was under the control of Tuoba Gui that the ship stabilized. Even with the protection of the array, Star Cha was blown away by the explosion. And Tuoba Yi, who took Xianxia's sword head-on, seemed to be fine. So when the true essence Qi gradually stabilized, Tuoba Yi gently waved the folding fan in his hand, and then smiled at Xianxia with a confident face. Mr. Qin, can we have a good talk now? Hearing this, Xianxi's eyes suddenly flashed with a glimmer of light. A mere mid-divine transformation realm cultivator could rely on this fan to block his full-strength attack, and he was not affected at all. This meant that the folding fan in front of him should be the life treasure of a supreme being. And this supreme being was not far away. Thinking of this, Xianxia immediately closed his eyes and began to carefully observe everything around him. Supreme being. Cave void. Sure enough, everything was as he expected. Wasn't there a tiny space crack on the Tuoba family's main ship? Pretending to be mysterious. Xianxia snorted angrily. When he opened his eyes again, a golden light suddenly burst out from his eyes, shooting straight toward the crack. But the moment Xianxi's eyes shot out the golden light, a slightly old voice suddenly sounded in everyone's ears. "Ha, fellow Daoist, don't be angry. This old man will show himself." As soon as the voice fell, an old man with white hair and beard appeared in front of Xianxia out of thin air. And at this time, when Tuoba Yi saw the old man appear, he immediately held up the folding fan with both hands, and respectfully returned it to the old man. Tuoba Yi greets Spiritual Master Void Pierce Stage. Chapter 495. Even if it was a battle between cultivators, they would usually go through hundreds or even thousands of moves. Only when both parties were exhausted would the victor be decided. It was naturally the same for cultivators. Unless there was a gap in cultivation level, even Xianxia, who was at the peak of divine transformation realm, could not take Yuhuan Tianzuan's life in 2 or 3 moves. Why was Tiandu able to withstand Xianxi's attacks repeatedly? It was because they had gathered the strength of everyone on the ship. Several thousand immortal cultivators above the gold core stage were using the cosmic stars formation as a medium to gather everyone in the formation. Everyone was bound together for good or ill, and everyone was bound together for good or ill. Let's give a simple example. If Xianxi's attack was compared to a flood, then the people of Tiandu were a dam. The dam was eroded bit by the flood. When the dam could no longer withstand the impact of the flood, the entire dam would immediately collapse and completely disappear in the torrential flood. Then there was a problem. Tiandu had gathered everyone's strength, but they could only barely hold on for a while. How could this Tuoba Yi, who was only at the middle stage of divine transformation realm, be able to withstand Xianxi's sword attack without suffering any injuries? How could there be nothing fishy about it? Xianxia immediately understood why Tuoba Yi could withstand his sword attack. The reason was very simple. Because there was an expert helping him in secret. The folding fan was Daoist Master Xianxi's natal magic treasure. Daoist Master Xianxia himself was a supreme existence. He could freely travel through the void like Xianxia. Because he had been hiding in the void and was not in the main plane, even Xianxia could not discover his existence immediately. Daoist Master Xianxia? After hearing Tuoba Ye's words, Xianxia could not help but frown slightly and asked coldly, "You are not a member of Tuoba family?" Hearing this, Daoist Master Xianxia chuckled. The smile on his face was just like the spring breeze, which formed a sharp contrast with the indifference on Xianxi's face. "My name is Master Xianxia. I am the sect master of Jade Clear Grotto Heaven." Jade Clear Grotto Heaven? Xianxia had long heard of this name from Changhua. Therefore, after hearing the old man's self-introduction, Xianxia immediately understood everything. Jade Clear Grotto Heaven should be the strongest force in the Supreme Palace enclosure, right? With the current strength of the Tuoba family, even with the addition of Tiandu, they simply could not withstand the fury of Xianxia. Tuoba Yi was very smart, but he was also very greedy. Just like Tobagwe. This was human nature. The moment Tuoba Yi received the news, he began to repeatedly weigh the gains and losses. As he thought about it, he finally couldn't resist the temptation and made the same choice as Tobagwe. Benefits always coexist with risks. If the ownership of Tiandu was viewed as a benefit, then Xianxia was the greatest risk. Just like doing business, in order to ensure that the Tuoba family would not go for wool and come back shorn, Tuoba Yi made up his mind and took the initiative to find Immortal Xianxia, hoping to share the risk of the Tuoba family and obtain benefits in a more secure way. One had to know that immortal cultivators were all people who would not rise early without benefits. Therefore, although Reverend Xianxia appeared to be kind and harmless, he might have secretly done a lot of atrocious and inhumane things. Jade Clear Grotto Heaven? But why did Immortal Xianxia come here? Wasn't it because he wanted to get a share of the profits? Therefore, Xianxia was too lazy to talk nonsense with him. With a clench of his right hand, the divine sword Dharma idol appeared in his hand again. Get out of the way. Since you and I are at the same level, you should know that you can't stop me. It's not easy for me to kill you, but killing him is like killing a chicken. Before his voice fell, Xianxia turned into a stream of light and disappeared in front of Immortal Xianxia. At this time, Tuoba Yi on the side did not even have any reaction. The divine sword Dharma idol suddenly appeared from the void and then slashed down at him. Didn't Tuoba Yi feel very proud of taking Xianxia's sword head-on just now? Therefore Xianxia wanted to see if Tuoba Yi could still be proud now. A cold light flashed, and Tuoba Yi suddenly opened his eyes wide with an expression of disbelief on his face. He never thought that Xianxia actually attacked him so abruptly in front of Daoist Master Void Pierce. This sword strike was simply too fast. It was like teleportation. With the flash of the sword light, an extremely fine wound appeared between Tuoba Yi's eyebrows. And this was obviously the true power of the Moonlight Sword technique. The first move of the Moonlight Sword technique. A sword hiding in the void. This sudden turn of events caused Daoist Master Void Pierce to be stunned on the spot. Everyone was at the insightful void realm. Who could be faster than the other? Therefore, in the situation where Xianxia had the upper hand, Immortal Xianxia had no time to rescue him. Arrogant. Arrogant to the extreme. I'm so angry. Reverend Xianxia let out a long whistle. The folding fan in his hand suddenly flew out like a sharp flying disc, following closely behind Xianxia. Seeing this, Xianxia smiled coldly and escaped into the void again. Insightful emptiness. Insight into the void, traversing freely. From the beginning to the end, Xianxia had no intention of fighting with Immortal Xianxia. Did he really think that he could scare him by using an insightful emptiness? What a joke. Everyone was at the insightful emptiness who could do anything to who. Xianxia couldn't kill Immortal Xianxia just like how Immortal Xianxia couldn't kill him. But, although Xianxia could not do anything to Reverend Xianxia, he could completely abandon Reverend Xianxia and turn his attention to Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan and the rest. Therefore, after Immortal Xianxia made his move, Xianxia didn't pay attention to him at all. Instead, he went near Xianxia again and continued his forceful demolition. Peng! 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 Xianxia flew in front with his long sword, while Immortal Xianxia chased behind with his fan. The two of them started a game of "you chase me" around Xianxia. However, the long sword in Xianxia's hand didn't stop for a moment. As he continued to attack, the casualties of Tiandu also increased. In the end, almost no gold core realm cultivator could still stand on the ship. It's over, the great formation is about to break. Quickly support. As the saying goes, no egg can remain intact when the nest is overturned. Seeing that the situation was so critical, several celestial venerables no longer cared about preserving their strength. They had to jump into the eye of the formation and forcibly prolong the life of the tottering heavenly cycle star formation. But at this moment, Tuoba, who had been steering the ship, suddenly exclaimed, "Venerable! We have arrived at Supreme Palace enclosure." Hearing this, Yu Huan Tianzuan immediately came to his side. After looking down at the land below, Yu Huan Tianzuan's eyes flashed with a trace of sternness, and he ordered coldly, "Continue flying, don't stop." Tuoba seemed to not understand what he meant. Continue flying? Fly to where? They had already arrived at Supreme Palace enclosure. Why didn't they scatter and flee? Anyway, no matter how strong Xianxia was, he was only one person. As long as everyone ran separately, could he really catch them one by one? Seeing this, Yu Huan Tianzuan didn't have the slightest intention of explaining. Instead, he seemed to suddenly think of something and suddenly asked, "Where is Jade Clear Grotto Heaven?" "In Central State." "Then go to Central State quick." Chapter 496. The Middle State was located in the middle of the Supreme Palace enclosure. There were many mountains in the territory, and one of them was the most well-known, the Heavenly Yu Mountain. The Heavenly Yu Mountain stretched for hundreds of miles. There were many rivers at the foot of the mountain and many cliffs at the top. It could be said that the mountain was high and the river was dangerous. In addition, the mountain was shrouded in clouds all year round. The spiritual energy in the mountain was far superior to the outside world. Therefore, it was also called the first paradise of the Supreme Palace enclosure. The name of the Jade Clear Paradise came from this. On this day, many disciples of the Jade Clear Paradise were carrying out their daily cultivation in the square. Suddenly, A dilapidated large Xianxia appeared in the clouds of the distant mountain. The disciples looked up and saw that the Xianxia seemed to have entered an uninhabited land. After breaking through the mountain gates formation, it directly landed in the square. Boom! With a loud sound, the dilapidated Xianxia finally completed its final mission and turned into a pile of debris in the martial arts practice field. Who is it? Who dares to break into the Jade Clear Paradise and destroy our mountain gate? Disciples, listen to my order. Take them down. Under the command of the Elder of Imparting Arts, all the disciples stepped forward, ready to capture all the people on the ship. But at this moment, a few loud sounds suddenly came from afar. At the same time, it was accompanied by an extremely strong wave of true essence. The strength of the two sides was so strong that even Elder Chuan, who had already stepped into the Yuanying realm, could not help but be frightened to the point of losing his sense of propriety. He did not even have time to order the disciples to immediately return to the main hall. A sword light suddenly fell from the sky and directly hit the wreckage of the Xianxia in the middle of the martial arts practice field. Bang! At that moment, Elder Chuan's eyes widened and his eyes were about to burst. However, he could only watch helplessly as a burst of powerful true essence suddenly erupted on the martial arts practice field. It was like throwing a grenade in the middle of a busy street. The shock waves from the explosion immediately shook all the disciples and made them vomit blood. Everyone was instantly sent flying dozens of meters away. Elder Chuan stared blankly at the center of the martial arts practice field. He saw a large formation slowly rising from the wreckage of the Xianxia. It seemed to be defending against external attacks. What was going on? This sudden turn of events caused Elder Gong Chuan to lose his composure. At this moment, a loud and resounding bell sound came from the Jade Clear Grotto heaven. It was a warning bell. It meant that there was an enemy attack. The moment the bell rang, 3 figures flew out of Jade Clear Grotto heaven. After a short meeting, the 3 of them turned into streams of light and completely disappeared from the technique imparting elder's sight. This is Tongxian Nanhua and Dongling? Elder technique imparting elder was completely stunned. Profound enlightening Nanhua Dongling. If a void pierce stage expert was included, then the 4 great reverends of the Jade Clear Heavenly Grotto Heaven would be gathered. The 3 ancestors had been in seclusion for many years and had long stopped caring about worldly affairs. His sudden appearance today meant that the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven was about to face a great calamity. Thinking of this, Elder Gong Chuan suddenly felt a chill in his heart. Therefore, he no longer cared about Xianxia's remains in the middle of the drill ground. Instead, he led the group of disciples and quickly returned to the main hall. Wasn't Yuhuan Tianzuan and his group on the Xianxia ship that suddenly fell into the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven? Under Qin Shi's continuous attacks, the damage to Tiandu was getting heavier and heavier. Seeing that the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven was right in front of him, Yuhuan Tianzuan gritted his teeth and ordered everyone to withdraw the grand formation to reduce the pressure that they had to bear. The result of doing so was obvious. After losing the protection of the grand formation, Xianxia, which was already badly damaged, was immediately shot down by Qin Shi and smashed into the drill ground of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. It finally stopped. Presumably, it would also stop here forever in the future. Venerable, this Xianxia has been destroyed. What should we do next? Tabague stood beside Yuhuan Tianzuan with a terrified expression. One should know that just now he saw with his own eyes that Tuoba Yi was struck by Qin Shi's sword. With Tuoba Ye's mid-divine transformation realm cultivation base, it should be impossible for him to die so easily. However, with Qin Shi's cultivation base, this sword would at least cause irreparable damage to Tuoba Yi. Therefore, when he thought that Qin Shi didn't even give face to Daoist Master Void Pierce stage and was determined to kill them today, Tabague was so scared that he almost couldn't stand still. If he had known that this matter would become so big, even if he was beaten to death, he would never take half a step into the Heaven's Pivot ruins. At this point, the third party, including Daoist Master Void Pierce stage, had reached the point where they couldn't back down. Yuan Tianzuan wanted to run. Qin Shi wanted to chase after him. Daoist Master Void Pierce stage wanted to stop him. If Yuan Tianzuan didn't run, Qin Shi would kill him. If Qin Shi didn't kill him, how could the Heart Demon Oath be fulfilled? As the third party, if Daoist Master Void Pierce stage couldn't stop Qin Shi, where should he put his old face? Due to the above reasons, today's matter was destined to be difficult to resolve. After hearing Tobague's question, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't answer for a long time. His face was gloomy and no one knew what he was thinking. Venerable. Venerable. Seeing that Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't answer, Tobague had to be like an ant on a hot pan, anxiously pacing around the array. Losing Xianxia meant that they lost the ability to move. Although the array hadn't been broken yet, how long could it last? Were they really going to sit here and wait for death? Tobague was annoyed. If it weren't for the fear that Yuhuan Tianzuan might suddenly turn hostile, he would have already fled. Just as Tobague was anxious, a dazzling light suddenly bloomed in the distant sky. Immediately afterward, 5 figures appeared out of thin air in the huge martial arts field. It was Xianxia and the 4 Daoist masters. They saw. Xianxia stood alone in the middle of the martial arts field facing the remains of Xianxia. The 4 Daoist masters stood in the 4 corners of the martial arts field, trying to trap Xianxia. Although Xianxia was surrounded by the 4 Daoist masters, there was no panic on his face. Instead, there was a faint smile on his face. Like a hunter who is preparing to capture his prey from a trap. Even if he was surrounded, Xianxia's attention wasn't on the 4 Daoist masters at all. Instead, it was focused on Yuhuan Tianzuan. Xianxia and Yuhuan Tianzuan looked at each other across the air. He didn't make any move. After the 4 Daoist masters looked at each other, they had to forcibly suppress the idea of striking first. One had to know that this was a battle between Daoist masters. Although they had the advantage in numbers, if they really started fighting, it would take a while for them to end the battle. If Xianxia was determined to fight here, wouldn't the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven be destroyed because of this? At that time, where would they go to cry? The 4 Daoist masters had scruples in their hearts, so they didn't dare to take the initiative to provoke him. The scene suddenly calmed down. Xianxia just looked at Yuhuan Tianzuan quietly, without any emotional fluctuations in his eyes. If it was said that he was a bloodthirsty beast before, then he was now a bloodthirsty beast. Then at this moment, Xianxia was a quiet pool of water, so calm that there wasn't a single ripple. And under Xianxia's gaze, Yuhuan Tianzuan couldn't help but feel an inexplicable pressure in his heart. At that moment, Yuhuan Tianzuan felt like a monkey in a cage. He finally understood. He understood why Xianxia was smiling. So he couldn't help but shake his head and laugh like Xianxia. But that smile. It obviously looked a little forced. Some choices once made can never be turned back. I think you should understand now, right? Xianxia was the first to speak, breaking the silence. Suddenly, a cool breeze blew from the mountain range in the distance, causing the branches to rustle and sway. It made the martial arts practice ground look especially cold and cheerless. The scene in front of them was really out of everyone's expectations. Why did the 4 Daoist masters move together? Wasn't it because they were worried that Xianxia might wreak havoc in this pure land of inheritance? But the result? When Xianxia really forced Yuhuan Tianzuan into a desperate situation, he didn't seem to have any intention of immediately making a move. What was going on? Chapter 497. On the huge martial arts practice field, everyone was waiting for him. After Xianxia broke the silence, a complicated expression appeared on Yuhuan Tianzuan's face. No one knew what he was really thinking and no one could understand his complicated feelings. Yuhuan Tianzuan remained silent, as if he had no intention of responding. Seeing this, Xianxia could not help but smile, and the divine sword Dharma idol appeared in his hand again. Still want to fight? Seeing Xianxia take out his sword, the 4 perfected masters' expressions changed drastically. They immediately retreated to the direction of the main hall, afraid that the main hall would be destroyed by the battle. 2 Supremes and 2 peak soul formation cultivators. This was the true strength of the 4 perfected masters, and also the reason why the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven could dominate the Supreme Palace enclosure. Even so, they did not want to continue fighting. Because Xianxia was a supreme being. As long as a cultivator reached the insightful emptiness realm, their survival ability would skyrocket. Unless they could accurately find the threads of law that Xianxia controlled, the 4 perfected masters would not be able to stop Xianxia. The world was so big, where could he not go? Xianxia was alone. Even if he turned the Supreme Palace enclosure upside down, it would have nothing to do with him. Since the 4 perfected masters were responsible for the inheritance of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, how could they allow this land of inheritance to be affected by the flames of war? Therefore, even though Daoist Master Void Pierce had been brushed off by Xianxia earlier, He had no choice but to restrain the thought of making a move at this moment. Instead he persuaded Xianxia with kind words. Fellow Daoist, listen to this old man. I've never heard of a supreme being in the Dubhe ruins. Since you've appeared, it means that you should be the owner of the Dubhe ruins. Now you've chased after this group of people for thousands of miles. There must be a reason for this. There must be a reason to kill them. This is a matter of the Dubhe ruins. The Jade Clear Grotto Heaven should not be involved. But now this matter has already affected the Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore I can only represent the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven and be forced to talk to you. I only hope that fellow Daoist can understand. This is the Supreme Palace enclosure, not the Tianshu ruins. Fellow Daoist, if you are willing to stop and make peace with my Supreme Palace enclosure, this old man is willing to be the middleman. I guarantee that I will give you a satisfactory answer, okay? After a long talk, Daoist Master Xianxia also made his attitude very clear. It was true that he was plotting against Tiandu, but he wasn't willing to involve Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. So as long as Xianxia was willing to sit down and talk, he might be able to come up with a solution that would satisfy everyone. However, after hearing this, Xianxia did not immediately respond. Instead he looked at Yuhuan Tianzuan with a playful expression and said slowly in a very calm tone, Yuhuan, do you know what your biggest problem is? That means he likes to act smart. To be honest, the existence of Tiandu means nothing to me. I remember that I once said that I would give you the appropriate treatment based on your performance. If you guys perform well, wouldn't I be less worried? At this point, Xianxia suddenly shook his head and continued in a sigh, what a pity, what a pity. You are too arrogant. This kind of arrogance has been deeply rooted in your bones. You are the master of Tiandu, so you can't tolerate being a prisoner at all. No matter how good the conditions I give you, as long as there is a chance, you will still choose to be my enemy. Am I right? Xianxia's voice came to an abrupt stop. He had said what he should say. There was no need to say what he shouldn't say. Why did he chase him all the way to the Supreme Palace enclosure? The Heart Demon Oath was only one of the reasons. In fact, Yuhuan Tianzuan's biggest mistake was actually, even if he guessed that Xianxia might care a lot about the mortals on Earth, he did not guess the weight of these mortals in Xianxia's heart. If Yuhuan Tianzuan had not delayed Xianxia in such a brutal way, perhaps Xianxia might have turned a blind eye and let Tiandu live. So what if he was a celestial lord? In Xianxia's eyes he was no different from an ordinary person. Although he had not returned to Earth and was unable to determine how much damage this disaster had caused to mankind. But as long as he thought about it, he could come up with a rough figure in his heart. This was definitely an astronomical figure. And compared to these innocent victims, what were the mere thousands of people in Tiandu? So, they must die. So what if they escaped to the Supreme Palace enclosure? So what if they found the 4 great spiritual masters? If I say I want to kill you, then I must kill you. This was Xianxia's attitude. The 4 great spiritual masters did not understand. However, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly understood. Remove the Great Formation. At that moment he was like an old man on the verge of death, waving his hand dispiritedly to signal everyone to remove the Great Formation. Everyone could not help but look at each other, completely unable to understand what he meant. In this regard, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not explain much. Instead, he directly walked out of the protective range of the Great Formation in front of everyone present. Mr. Qin. Yuhuan Tianzuan paused for a moment, then suddenly lowered his head to Xianxia and said, this old man knows his mistake. Xianxia did not reply. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan could not help but reveal a bitter smile. This old man is the head of the 10 celestial sovereigns. Everything in Tiandu is decided by this old man alone. Today's matter is all because of this old man. This old man knows that his sins are grave and does not dare to ask for Mr.'s forgiveness. I only hope that Mr. can give these poor children a way out on account of the fact that my Tiandu has long since ceased to exist in name. As he spoke, Yuhuan Tianzuan turned his head to look at the remnants of the Tiandu battalion. Behind him. At this time, everyone finally understood what he wanted to do, so they all tried to dissuade him. Sky Sovereign, we are not afraid of him. Come back quickly. We can still hold on. At most we'll just die in the bird's nest. What are we afraid of? Right. We're not afraid of him. For the prestige of the sacred ancestor. For the glory of Tiandu. These people in front of him were the last hope of Tiandu. Yuhuan Tianzuan silently looked at the crowd. but the corner of his mouth suddenly revealed a faint smile. Then he turned to look at Xianxia. Didn't Xianxia want him to give a reasonable explanation? Then try your best. Since things have come to this old man is only willing to use my blood to quell the anger in your heart. I only hope that Mr. can let them live. Sigh. After a deep sigh, this Yuhuan Tianzuan, who had been in charge of Tiandu for hundreds of years, completely turned into a cloud of smoke and disappeared in front of everyone's eyes. However, even though Yuhuan Tianzuan had died on the spot, the sword in Xianxi's hand still did not disappear. He looked at everything in front of him indifferently. It seemed that he was not very satisfied with this result. Seeing this, the remaining Empyreans couldn't help but look at each other. Then, as if they had made up their minds, they all walked out of the range of the great array. The successive deaths of the 10 Empyreans seemed to announce the end of the era that belonged to Tiandu. And with their fall, everything that happened today was destined to be recorded in the annals of history. On this day, Xianxia alone in the Supreme Palace enclosure's jade clear grotto heaven, forced back the 4 great spiritual masters, and forced the 10 Empyreans to their deaths. The Lord of the Sky's core. From this, his might shook the Supreme Palace enclosure. Chapter 498. After the death of the 10 Empyreans, Tobague naturally couldn't escape death. In this regard, Xianxi's face didn't show much emotion. As if he was looking at a very ordinary thing, after taking a deep look at the hundreds of people left in Tiandu, the long sword in his hand turned into a wisp of smoke and dissipated in front of him. Since the culprits had all been killed, Xianxia was too lazy to kill them all. It was just to give some face to the sacred ancestor so that the inheritance of Tiandu would not be cut off because of this. Then Xianxia finally cast his gaze on Daoist Master Void Pierce again. He did not have a good impression of these 4 greedy old bastards. Thus he hastily cupped his hands and bowed. Then he coldly said, "This matter is over. This Qin will not disturb you all any longer. Goodbye." As soon as his voice fell, without waiting for Daoist Master Void Pierce's reply, Xianxia had turned into a stream of light and completely disappeared from jade clear grotto heaven. Daoist cave spirit seemed to be a little dissatisfied with Xianxi's arrogant attitude, so after a cold snort he wanted to move forward to stop him. However, just as Daoist cave spirit was about to move, Daoist Master Void Pierce suddenly stopped him. "Junior brother, don't act rashly. This person's cultivation is almost the same as mine, and his grasp of the true meaning of the word void is quite proficient. Even if the 4 of us join forces, we don't have full confidence that we can stop him today. In that case, why would Jade Clear Grotto Heaven want to make such a strong enemy for no reason? Let him go, today's matter is over. In addition, regarding the aftermath of Tiandu, everything will be handed over to junior brother Tongxian to deal with. Junior brother Cave Spirit, come with me, senior brother has something to say to you." Xianxia left the Supreme Palace enclosure just like that. He didn't even bother to think about any problems related to Tiandu because everything that happened next had nothing to do with him. And the reason why he didn't kill Tiandu was actually because of this. The 4 Daoist masters seemed to have lost face, but in the end they also got the benefits they wanted, namely, the remnants of Tiandu. Tiandu represented an era that was completely different from the Supreme Palace enclosure. The 4 spiritual masters could tolerate Xianxia brushing away their face, but they absolutely could not tolerate Xianxia killing the remnants of the Tiandu division in front of them. If that was the case, wouldn't it mean that all their hard work today was in vain? Although the celestial sovereigns of the 10 directions had fallen, the sacred ancestor Taiching's inheritance had been passed down. This was the inheritance from the Dubhe ruins. How could the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven not be tempted? And this was the bottom line of the 4 sages. If Xianxi's bottom line was to kill all the culprits, then Yuhuan Tianzuan's bottom line was to let Tiandu's inheritance continue. All 3 parties had their own bottom lines. In the end, it was obvious that the final result could only be produced under the condition that these 3 bottom lines were not touched. Back to Xianxia. After leaving the Supreme Palace enclosure, Xianxia did not rush back to Earth immediately. Instead, he stayed near the Aote Nebula for a while. Everything that had happened before could be considered as a reminder to Xianxia. After losing the protection of the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars, the solar system had long been reduced to a vegetable market where everyone could enter and exit freely. Naturally, Xianxia was very dissatisfied with this. The universe was so big. If the Supreme Palace enclosure could appear today, who knew what kind of terrifying monster would appear tomorrow? The current Earth was still too weak and could not withstand such repeated torment. Therefore, the matter of reactivating the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars was imperative. Thinking of this, Xianxia took out the soul mirror and studied it carefully. However, this broken mirror had been in a sealed state ever since he forcefully brought out the remnant soul of his sister-in-law. Even if Xianxia used all kinds of methods, he could not successfully activate it. Helpless, Xianxia could only temporarily put aside the idea of reactivating the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars, and use his own method to build a barrier for the solar system. The Tai Ching divine ancestor used the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars to seal the entire solar system. Such a shocking move could not be done by a mere insightful emptiness realm cultivator. Therefore, Xianxia could only use a more clever method, and that was setting up one after another waymark in the Haute Nebula, and finally connecting these waymarks together to serve as a warning. Although the waymarks could not prevent outsiders from entering like the grand formation, Xianxia could be informed of the news immediately and set off to check it out. Although this arrangement was a little strenuous and unrewarding, it played a certain defensive role. Presumably, today's incident would not happen again. Besides, judging from the commotion Xianxia had caused at the Supreme Palace enclosure earlier, even if someone wanted to sneak into the Tianshu ruins to investigate in the future, they would probably think twice before doing so. After all, there was a living paragon living inside. Because the Haute Nebula was simply too big, by the time Xianxia finished setting up the waymarks and successfully returned to Earth, nearly half a month had passed. This was the first time Xianxia had left without saying goodbye. The little girl clearly remembered what Xianxia had said to her before he left. Therefore, every day after school she would sit in the courtyard with Big Cat in her arms and stare at the sky, constantly muttering when her father would come back. The April sun shone on the ground, causing the calm lake to sparkle. The willows on the shore of Hohai gently swayed their bodies, as if telling passers-by the beauty of summer. In the blink of an eye, that cute little girl back then, she was almost 7 years old now. 7 years old. Whenever a child reached this age and stayed in school for a period of time, there would inevitably be some new changes in their body. The words primary school student. In fact, it was a sign that she had already entered another important stage in her life. Because at this age children would no longer be as ignorant as before. Instead, they would learn to think like adults. For example, Nian was now thinking about a very important question. Big Cat, I remember you could become bigger in the past? I was riding on top of you. Why can't you become bigger now? Hurry up and show me. As she spoke, Nian picked up Big Cat with both hands, lifted it in the air and shook it left and right. In this regard, Big Cat rolled its eyes and pretended not to hear. One had to know that Qin Ruing hadn't even returned home when the little guy rode the Big Cat. And as she grew older, Xianxia had already ordered Big Cat not to change back to its original form. After not seeing Big Cat for 2 or 3 years, the little girl's memory would inevitably be a little different. Therefore, she could not help but wonder if she remembered wrongly. With Big Cat's small body, how could it carry her? Girls develop earlier than boys. In addition, she would be 7 years old next month, so Nian's height had already reached 1.2 meters. She had to buy an adult ticket to board the plane. But what about Big Cat? This guy was still the same as before, a little bigger than a fart, as if there was no change at all. Chapter 499. April in the human world. Hundreds of flowers bloomed, willow trees were graceful, clear water conveyed love, mountain ranges were covered in fragrances everywhere. It was a sunny afternoon, but faint thoughts were flowing slowly in this overflowing spring. Nian hugged Big Cat and sat quietly on a chair. However, her pair of beautiful big eyes looked around from time to time. She only hoped that in the blink of an eye, she would be able to see her father suddenly appear by her side. Perhaps she was already used to Xianxia not being at home for a long time, so after the little guy was in a daze in the courtyard for a while, he hugged Big Cat and ran out of the Chuehua gate. Mom, I'm going to find Wenwen and Mingming to play. After saying that, without waiting for Qin Ruoying to reply, the little guy had already opened the gate. This was her daily schedule outside of school. Either the brothers came to her house to watch cartoons, or she went out to find the brothers to walk around outside. Every time at this time, Changhua and Yiji would follow behind her with a frown, looking at the 3 little guys running around Hohai. The way of the world now was not the same as before. In the past, no matter the age of the child, as long as they learned to run, they could play with the group. Their parents might come from the same brigade or from the same courtyard. In short, no matter the age, the children would always naturally gather together. A group of people would run over and a group of people would run over. At that time there were no exquisite toys. Among the children there would naturally be a child king. Then, under the lead of this child king, a group of people would go up the mountain to catch cicadas today and go into the water to catch fish tomorrow. Once the weather was bad, everyone would hide in the old factory to play hide and seek, play jump rope, and live a happy life. Such a pure childhood. Thinking about it, it was very beautiful. But it was a pity. With the change of time, these forms of entertainment had basically bid farewell to the children's childhood. Instead, there were mobile phones, iPads, cartoons, and all kinds of exquisite toys. The times were progressing, but people's hearts were becoming more and more indifferent. In the past, as long as a child stood outside the door and shouted, even if the child was only 4 or 5 years old, the parents could let him go out to play without worry. What if they tried it now? Wouldn't their parents chase after them with a broom? It was rare to see parents who allowed their children to roam freely in the neighborhood. More and more children were restricted by their parents to a safe range that they could accept, which also led to the children having less and less contact with peers of the same age. There was an essay question called My Little Friends in primary school Chinese. The frequency of this question appearing was second only to The Most Unforgettable Thing and My Parents. Who knew which little friend the children were thinking of when they were writing this essay? Luban number 7 or Arthur? The three little fellows strolled around Ho-Hai. After seeing many people swimming in the water, they stood by the shore and eagerly watched. They had learned how to skate, but they had not learned how to swim yet. Therefore, after seeing so many people frolicking in the lake, the three little fellows were immediately moved. The water quality in Ho-Hai is very good. Swimming in the wild here can be considered a custom of the old Shangjing people. Although the authorities clearly prohibited swimming in Ho-Hai, it couldn't stop the enthusiasm of the local people. Once the weather warmed up, more and more people would sneak to Ho-Hai to swim. Nian, I heard from the teacher that cats can swim. How about, let's throw Big Cat into the water and see if it can swim. Summer vacation was in 2 months. When school started in the second half of the year, the three of them would officially enter the 2nd grade. As they got older, the brothers came up with more and more bad ideas. One guessed that if she sneaked into the water, Gu Lao would drag her to the yard and beat her repeatedly when she got home. Therefore, she came up with the idea of the big cat. The old man strictly forbade them from swimming in the river, but he didn't say that Big Cat was not allowed to swim in the river. Therefore, after hearing Wenwen's suggestion, the little fellow was obviously moved. She had been to the sea and she had also been to the water. However, the turbulent water was obviously different from the calm lake in front of her. And because she had seen the sea, the moment she heard Wenwen's suggestion, Nian was slightly excited and said to the big cat, "Big cat, do you like swimming? Swimming is fun. I'll take you to swim, okay?" The big cat was lying lazily in her arms and taking a nap. The moment it heard the little fellow say that she was going to take it to swim, its feline instincts made its hair stand on end. Meow. The three children were standing by the lake and there were steps under the river embankment. According to Nian's idea, after letting the big cat swim in the water, they could stand here and take the big cat back. Therefore, she didn't even wait for the big cat to come back to its senses. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly let go and threw the big cat directly into the back of the lake. Meow. This time the big cat was really panicking. As a cat, it was one thing to be able to swim, but it was another thing to be afraid of water. Therefore, the moment it was thrown out by Nian, the big cat began to twist its body crazily in the air. It wanted to borrow strength, but it couldn't find any place to do so. It could only watch as it got closer and closer to the deep lake. Meow. With a shriek, its body suddenly expanded by 30% in the air. It was instinctive to be afraid of water. Driven by its instincts, it obviously didn't care about Xianxi's constant warnings. Therefore, the moment the big cat was about to fall into the water, its body grew at least 2 to 3 times its original size. But at this moment, a ray of vital energy shot out from nowhere, and then it forced the big cat back into its domestic cat form. Fush. With the sound of falling into the water, the big cat seemed to have suffered a great grievance and soaked in the water, it meowed miserably. Nian, look. I told you it could swim. Seeing that the big cat didn't sink into the water, the two brothers immediately shouted happily. However, when Yen Yen saw the big cat's pitiful appearance, she suddenly thought of something, so she quickly walked down the steps, then stood on the shore and waved at the big cat. "Big cat, come over quickly, the water is cold." As she spoke, Yen Yen reached her hand into the lake. The lake was indeed very cold. "Big cat, I'm sorry. The water is so cold, I shouldn't have thrown you into the water. Come, I'll hold you, this way you won't be cold, right?" After pulling the big cat out of the lake, Yen Yen began to apologize to the big cat. She completely ignored the big cat's wet body, and directly hugged the big cat into her arms, trying to use her body to drive the cold away for the big cat. Seeing this, the two brothers couldn't laugh anymore. At this time they finally realized that they were in the wrong, so they imitated Yen Yen, surrounded the big cat and apologized with a heart full of guilt. Exploration and practice. This was a process that children had to go through in the process of growing up. Because of the immaturity of the mind, they would always do a lot of unreasonable things unintentionally. At this time, the effect of a parent's blind punishment was far less than the correct guidance. Even if Xianxia wasn't by her side today, Yen Yen still quickly realized that she was in the wrong. What did this mean? It meant that she was really starting to grow up and gradually forming her own worldview. "You have such a cute and sensible daughter. Mr. Chen, you're so lucky. I'm so envious." Just as the three little guys were running in circles around the big cat, Xianxia and Jiang Yan silently appeared not far behind them. In fact, Xianxia had come back a long time ago. It was just that he saw that Yen Yen was having fun, so he didn't show up to disturb them. And the reason why Xianxia didn't go home immediately was because, of course, it was because of Jiang Yan. After all, if Jiang Yan hadn't arrived in time, Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan might have been served with good food and drinks by the Tuoba family right now. Chapter 500. If Jiang Yan had not arrived in time, Yu Huan Tianzuan and his group would have successfully entered the space jump and reached the Supreme Palace enclosure as quickly as possible. Although Xianxia could chase after Yu Huan Tianzuan to the Supreme Palace enclosure after dealing with the Tuoba family's men of sacrifice. But by that time, Tiandu's group might have already broken up into pieces and scattered in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Could it be? Could Xianxia plow through the Supreme Palace enclosure and find everyone in Tiandu even if he had to dig 3 feet into the ground? Even if Xianxia really had the leisure to do so, he did not have so much time to waste in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, it was obviously the best result to be able to catch the remnants of Tiandu before they scattered. Xianxia was very satisfied with this result. The matter of thanking Jiang Yan was naturally within reason. This was a catastrophe that affected the whole world and appeared almost everywhere at the same time. Although the disaster did not last long, it still brought huge losses to mankind, and the American continent suffered the most. This disaster was unanimously named by scientists all over the world Skyfire. It was said to be a supernatural phenomenon caused by a solar storm. As for the specific cause of Skyfire, scientists were still researching and had not yet given a rigorous and reasonable report. Skyfire swept across the world, but Wuxia was the least affected. Only the city of Zygase and a few surrounding villages and towns were attacked by Skyfire. As Europe was too close to Asia, they were the first to receive support from Daoist Island. Africa was poor and Australia was small. These places were sparsely populated and were not the first target of the Tuoba family. Therefore, the American continent, which was far away at the other end of the Pacific Ocean, naturally became the disaster area. Oldme had been through a lot in the past few years. First, there was the threat of the supervolcano, and then there was the trouble of Changhua and Yiji. After a while of peace, Skyfire came again. Perhaps this was retribution. Oldme did not do bad things in Central Asia because of oil, which directly caused the local people to suffer the pain of war. After the Skyfire incident, Oldme could finally have some peace and quiet. Nowadays, the TV stations broadcast the disaster situations all day long. But for the viewers watching the TV, as long as the disaster did not befall them, wouldn't they still be eating and sleeping every day? Disaster relief. That was a matter for the country. At most, the commoners would chat with each other after a meal. Jiang Yan accepted Xianxia's thanks with a smile. In addition, he also brought a slightly surprising piece of news to Xianxia. That was, Daoist Island had officially joined the Wu Lian. Because of this, Jiang Yan became one of the Wu Lian tycoons. His status was even higher than Qin Yong Wang and Wang Chuanju. All in all, Jiang Yan was much more sensible than Yu Huan Tianzuan. Ever since Zhang Yan had known Xianxia, this old guy had been sending gifts and running errands for him. The only thing he hadn't done was to enshrine Xianxia in the ancestral hall. As the saying goes, the older the wiser. Combining the information collected by the 9 serenities and the bits and pieces of information he heard from Xianxia, Zhang Yan immediately connected the dots and guessed most of it. Seeing that Xianxia had even taken care of Tiandu, if he still dared to jump around under Qianxi's nose, wouldn't he be tired of living? Therefore, Zhang Yan immediately changed the management strategy of the 9 serenities. Since he couldn't beat you, he might as well join you. After all, the 9 serenities was different from Tiandu. Zhang Yan didn't have as much self-esteem as Yuhuan Tianzuan, who didn't want to work with. Since there were benefits to following Qianxia, why would he waste time blindly thinking about it? In this regard, Qianxia didn't express any opinions. After all, he didn't own Wu Lian and Zhang Yan wasn't his subordinate. Why should he worry so much? If he had the time, he might as well spend it playing with Nian Yan. The days returned to normal. In the blink of an eye, the little girl was now 7 years old and had officially entered the 2nd grade of primary school. It had to be said that Nian Yan was a child that didn't cause anyone to worry about her. As soon as Qianxia sent Nian Yan to the classroom, the teacher came to find him alone. Nian Yan's class teacher was surnamed Zhang. She was a woman in her 30s or 40s and looked very kind. Mr. Chen, it's like this. Qin Yan's academic results and her performance in all aspects are extremely outstanding in the entire grade. As her class teacher, I feel like I have an obligation to remind you. I wonder, have you ever considered letting Qin Yan skip a grade? Hearing this, Qianxia couldn't help but be stunned. Skip a grade? In fact, skipping a grade was actually a very common thing in primary school because the Department of Education also had clear regulations in this regard. According to the Department of Education's regulations, as long as the student's academic performance was particularly outstanding and reached the 1st grade in advance, the student or their parents could apply. After a comprehensive assessment by the school and a written report to the Higher Education Department for approval, the student could skip a grade. After all, everyone's IQ was different. There were always children whose IQ was far higher than their peers. She already knew calculus. Did she have to be locked in the classroom with her peers to calculate addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division? Qianxia had officially begun to teach Nian Yan cultivation. Although he only taught Nian Yan how to gather qi and didn't teach her any techniques after that. However, under the constant scouring of the spirit energy of heaven and earth, Nian Yan's intelligence would inevitably increase by leaps and bounds. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before Nian Yan wouldn't be able to play with the 2 brothers anymore. And this was also the fundamental reason why Qianxia had always been opposed to letting Nian Yan cultivate. It felt like he was giving Nian Yan a catalyst. It inevitably gave him a strange feeling. There was a saying, hope for your son to become a dragon and hope for your daughter to become a phoenix. Was Qianxia really different from those flirtatious B******? Did he really have to turn his daughter into a fool? How was that possible? At this point, Qianxia could only let nature take its course. Now that the homeroom teacher took the initiative to mention this point, it actually meant that Nian Yan really wasn't suitable to continue staying in the 2nd grade. The matter of skipping grades was something that had to be done. However, before this, Qianxia still had to ask the little girl for her opinion. After all, there were 2 sides to everything. Grades during the compulsory education period were secondary. Physical and mental health were the most important. Children in the lower grades were not mentally mature. Suddenly changing from a familiar environment to an unfamiliar environment, and surrounded by children who were older than her, naturally took a long time to adapt. Once the child couldn't adapt, the impact could be extremely bad or even irreversible. Therefore, after Qianxia and teacher Zhang had a detailed discussion, he called the little girl to the office. Nian Yan, tell daddy, do you want to skip a grade? Chapter 501. Skip a grade? The little girl blinked her eyes as if she did not understand what Qianxia meant. Seeing this, Qianxia patiently explained to her. The teacher said that with your grades, you don't need to go to the 2nd grade. You can go directly to the 3rd grade and study with the 3rd grade brothers and sisters. Nian Yan, do you want to go? Hearing this, the little girl smiled proudly. Sure. The students in our class are too stupid. They can't even do such simple questions. I'm much smarter than them. I already know how to do the 3rd grade questions. The little girl's grades were very good. It was inevitable that the teacher would take the initiative to give her special attention, so she had already done the 3rd grade questions before. And this was also the reason why the teacher took the initiative to ask Xianxia to let Nian skip a grade. To Xianxia, grades were naturally secondary. A child's physical and mental health was the most important. Therefore, even if the little girl showed an eager look, Xianxia was still a little worried and reminded her, Nian, you have to think carefully. You're now a student of the second grade class. If you skip a grade, you'll be a student of the second grade class. Look, the second grade class is there. As he said this, Xianxia led the little girl to the window, then carried her and indicated to her to look at the classroom opposite. That was the second grade class. She did not know any of the classmates in the class. If she chose to skip a grade, then from today onwards she would be a student of this class. For a child, it would be easier for them to understand if there was a real example. Therefore, when the little girl saw the unfamiliar faces in the classroom of the third grade class too, she immediately hesitated. She would be studying in that classroom in the future? The little girl stared at the classroom opposite. The expression on her little face was very serious. She did not immediately express her opinion. However, Xianxia saw the hesitation in her, so he immediately turned around and smiled at Teacher Zhang. Was there a need to say this? Nian must be scared. Instead of forcing her into an unfamiliar environment, it was better to let her stay in the second grade class. At least it wouldn't bring too much psychological pressure to her. Xianxi's mind turned and he suddenly made a decision. Zhang Laoshe didn't have any objections to this. After all, she had seen too many situations like this. Basically, every year a few children would face such a choice. There were pros and cons to skipping grades, so she was only responsible for making suggestions. The final decision was still in the hands of the parents. Thank you for your concern, Teacher Zhang. As you can see, this child doesn't seem to be very willing, so the matter of skipping grades. Xianxia turned around and thanked Teacher Zhang. But at this moment, the little fellow suddenly interrupted him. Dad, what are the benefits of skipping grades? After saying that, the little guy looked up at Xianxia, his eyes filled with curiosity. Benefits? There are many of them. Look, you have to study for a full 6 years in primary school. If you skip grades, you will study 1 year less than others. You will enter secondary school and even university earlier. Taking 10,000 steps back, if your results aren't good in the future, you can even repeat a year more than others. No matter how you look at it, it's still a win. Of course, with your results, repeating a year is definitely impossible. Dad believes in you. Xianxia briefly explained the benefits of skipping grades to the little fellow and didn't forget to encourage her at the end. Hearing this, the little fellow put on a thoughtful expression. She already understood the benefits of skipping grades. As for the disadvantages of skipping grades, in fact, Xianxia didn't need to point it out. The little fellow could clearly feel it herself. Xianxia never forced the little fellow. So when he saw Nian's hesitation, he immediately made a decision in his heart. However, Xianxia didn't notice. The little fellow had already learned how to read people's expressions. So even if he didn't express any attitude, the little fellow could keenly sense that her father still hoped that she would choose to skip grades. After all, for any parent, if their child could skip grades, it would be a great thing. Because this showed how outstanding their child was. Xianxia felt sorry for the little fellow just like how the little fellow felt sorry for him. Nian didn't want to disappoint Xianxia. Therefore, after thinking about it seriously, she said to Xianxia with a determined face, Dad, I want to skip grades. This time it was Xianxia's turn to be surprised. He thought that Nian didn't understand the pros and cons, so he immediately asked, Nian, do you really want to skip grades? Aren't you afraid? After skipping grades, you won't be in this class anymore. The students in class 2 of grade 3 are all 1 year older than you. Who knows, they might even gang up to bully you. As soon as this was said, a trace of embarrassment flashed across Teacher Zhang's face. If she didn't want to skip grades, then so be it. Who would scare a child like this? Furthermore, was their school the kind of third-rate school that would tolerate bullying? Teacher Zhang wanted to say something but stopped. Nian immediately replied, I'm not afraid. Although I'm younger than them, I'm smarter than them. Why should I be afraid? I'm also the class monitor of our class. I want to be the class monitor of grade 3 class 2 in the future. Also, no one in our class dares to bully me. I'll beat up whoever dares to bully me. At this point, Nian clenched her little fist and added proudly, This is what you taught me, Dad. Did you forget, Dad? Hearing this, Xianxia instantly felt awkward. After glancing at Teacher Zhang with some embarrassment, He hurriedly stopped the little fellow's bold words. Don't talk nonsense. Dad didn't teach you to hit people. Dad, you clearly said that before. When did I? The teacher is right next to us. Don't talk nonsense. I did. Dad is shameless. The father and daughter joked around for a while. When Teacher Zhang saw this, he didn't take it to heart. Instead, he went back to his seat and smiled as he handed a form to Qianxia. Mr. Qin, this is the child's grade skipping application form. Please fill it in accordingly. After filling it out, I'll submit it to the school for review. After the school's review is completed and the information is submitted to the Education Bureau, the child's school roll can be changed in about 7 working days. Of course, this is all part of the process. School starts today. If you don't have any other opinions, Nian can directly report to grade 3 class 2 with me. That's it? She took the form from the teacher with some hesitation. After all, he didn't know that the little fellow already had her own ideas. He only thought that the little fellow didn't understand the pros and cons of this and thought that it was a fun thing to do. Regarding this, the little fellow was exceptionally resolute. She wasn't afraid. Furthermore, she would perform better than before. She definitely wouldn't disappoint her father. Thinking about it, if she knew the little fellow's true thoughts, he would definitely be moved to tears by this considerate little jacket. Sorry, I've been sorting out the plot for the past 2 days, so the update is a little slow. Please forgive me. Chapter 502. The little girl's 3rd grade life began abruptly. According to the school's arrangements, today was the day that the new teaching materials were distributed. Hence, after the little girl returned to 2nd grade class 2 and picked up her backpack, she left the classroom that was supposed to belong to her under the watchful eyes of her classmates. At that moment, she saw a proud expression on the little girl's face. It had to be said that this child really made her father proud. Under the guidance of the teacher, Nian quickly arrived at the entrance of 3rd grade class 2. The form teacher of 3rd grade class 2 was also a middle-aged woman with the surname Li. She was slightly chubby and looked exceptionally amiable. It should be known that the form teachers of elementary schools were usually not changed easily. From the day the child entered school, the form teacher would always be by their side for the next 6 years until the child graduated. Hence, the moment Teacher Li saw Nian, her face was so happy that flowers were about to bloom. Since this child could skip grades, it meant that she had huge potential. In Wuxia, the child's results were naturally the teacher's achievements. Wasn't this equivalent to her picking up a huge bargain? Teacher Li was so happy that she wanted to help Nian carry her backpack. But she didn't expect that. Her suggestion was politely rejected by the little girl. Thank you, teacher. I'm a student. I should carry my own backpack. Seeing the little girl's obedient manner, Teacher Li was instantly delighted. Oh. This child is so sensible. You're called Nian, right? I like you. It was class time now, so after a simple exchange of words with Teacher Zhang, Teacher Li directly put her hand on the little girl's shoulder and walked her into 3rd grade class 2. The 3rd-year students were basically all old foxes. After Teacher Li went out and was delayed for a while, the classroom suddenly became a little noisy. Come, everyone, quiet down. Let me introduce you. This is our new classmate, Nian. Everyone, welcome. After saying that, Teacher Li took the lead in clapping her hands. In an instant, there was a burst of lively applause in the classroom. The little fellow stood nervously beside Teacher Li, looking at the unfamiliar faces below the stage. She suddenly felt a burst of fear in her heart for no reason, so much so that her little face slightly tensed up. Nian skipped a grade, so he should be 1 year younger than you. But her grades are very good, so she doesn't need to go to the 2nd grade anymore. Now that she's in our class, she'll be the youngest student in our class. As Nian's elder brother and sister, you should. Speaking up to this point, Teacher Li deliberately paused for a moment, then raised his hand to signal the students present to answer together. Seeing this, the students in the class were also quick-witted. Even if they hadn't rehearsed it beforehand, they all replied in unison, "Take care of her." Yes. Nian is our younger sister, so we have to take care of her. The little guy was a little confused. The students in the class were too enthusiastic. After hearing such warm applause and cheers, the tension on the little guy's face slowly dissipated, and he gradually revealed a shy smile. She stood silently in the corridor, smiling as he watched his daughter reintegrate into a new big family. This scene was somewhat familiar. That smart and sensible little baby had finally grown into a shy flower bud. Girls matured earlier and Yin Yin was on the tall side. Even in the 3rd grade she was considered average height, so the teacher could only arrange for her to sit in the 3rd row from the back. One had to know that the little brat now was incredible. Not to mention the 3rd grade, even kindergarten had the phenomenon of puppy love. Regarding this, many parents' reactions were, the child is still young and doesn't know anything. It's just 2 people together for fun. On this point their understanding was too one-sided. Actually, children also knew what it meant to be in a relationship. It was just that their thinking was still very simple, and they couldn't understand the meaning of the word sex. What was wrong with children? Couldn't children like other people? Thinking about the opposite sex day and night, yearning for the opposite sex day and night, this wasn't something only adults could do. Children could also like people. It was just that some children were too shy. Even if they liked someone very much, they would never show the slightest bit of it. They would even show an inexplicable hostility to the person they liked. In the words of an adult, it should be, 300 taels of silver here. In Xianxia's eyes, Nian Nian was simply a little kid who hadn't been weaned yet. But in the eyes of her peers, Nian Nian on the other hand was a true goddess. There were many precocious children in this class, at least half of them. Therefore, when Nian Nian finished her self-introduction and walked from the podium to her seat, almost everyone was staring at her. Some of the bolder ones stared straight at her, not even blinking their eyes. Some of the more timid ones deliberately turned their heads to the side and secretly looked out of the corner of their eyes. Almost every child had their own thoughts about this student who had suddenly skipped a grade. However, most of the boys' hearts were filled with admiration, while most of the girls' hearts were filled with jealousy. Xianxia naturally saw the subtle changes on everyone's faces. However, he was like many parents and didn't take these things to heart. They were just children. They were the flowers of the motherland. They were the pillars of the motherland's future. How could they have so many dirty thoughts? Seeing the little guy sitting down, Xianxia's mood immediately relaxed. He gave Big Cat a look, and the cat immediately understood Xianxia's meaning. So, like a wisp of smoke, it leapt up to the big tree in the middle of the school building, and then laid down on a tree branch facing 3rd year class 2 to take a nap. Then Xianxia nodded at the teacher through the window to thank him and then quietly left. The little guy seemed to have noticed that her father had left, so she quickly looked out of the window, but there was no one there. Seeing this, a trace of disappointment flashed across her face. But soon, this disappointment disappeared with the new teaching materials handed out by the teacher. By the time she took out a fountain pen and solemnly wrote her name on the first page of each book, her 3rd year studies had officially begun. Thieves in 1st grade, thieves in 2nd grade. No one chased after the 3rd grade beauties. Love letters from the 4th grade flew everywhere. Piles of homework from the 5th grade. Pairs of lovebirds from the 6th grade. This is our class song. Once it was too loud and alarmed the teaching director. Then the whole class was scolded by him. Well, at that time I was in 3rd grade. The last few lines are more serious, so I won't write them here. Chapter 503. After settling the little girl down, Xianxia left the school. As soon as he walked out of the school gate, he looked up and saw Qin Ruiying in a white dress, waiting quietly by the side of the road. In fact, Xianxia had already said that there was no need for 2 people to pick up and drop off the child. But Qin Ruiying did not pay attention to him at all, and completely treated sending Yan Yan to school as something that she had to do every day. Ying, okay, where do you want to go today? I'll go with you. Before he arrived, Xianxia's voice came from afar. Qin Ruiying thought for a while, but shook her head gently and then responded very indifferently, I won't go shopping today, let's go home first, I have a few questions about cultivation that I want to ask you. Ask? Hearing this, Xianxia was suddenly happy, so he quickly went over and said politely, what's the relationship between the 2 of us? Do you still need to use the word, ask? Qin Ruiying rolled her eyes at him and did not say anything. Seeing this, Xianxia did not feel offended at all, instead he happily reached out his hand to hail a taxi. After this period of time together, Qin Ruiying's attitude towards him had improved a lot. On one hand, it was because of the family's enthusiasm towards her. On the other hand, it was entirely because she gradually found many traces of her existence in her daily life. For example, the familiar feeling of walking in the alley, the flowers in the yard, and the photos in the phone, all of these things seemed to be saying, she was the mistress of this family. Therefore Qin Ruiying's attitude towards Xianxia gradually improved. Although she had not recalled any memories of the past, at least she had regained the feeling of cultivation under the reminder of her sister-in-law. In addition, it seemed that only when she was cultivating she could faintly find the intimate feeling that she had with Xianxia. The many changes in Qin Ruiying were naturally seen by Xianxia. Therefore every time he thought of this problem he could not help but feel a burst of joy in his heart. If it continued to develop at this rate, wouldn't it not be long before he could climb into Yingying's bed again? They didn't wander around today, so when the couple returned to the side courtyard, it was only 9 in the morning. As soon as Xianxia pushed open the door, the sound of punches and kicks could be heard from the courtyard. It was his sister-in-law and her 2 punching bags. After this period of actual combat, Chenghua and Yiji's martial arts had greatly improved. When the 2 of them joined forces, they could even easily survive 200 to 300 rounds against Qin Xueqing. Xianxia didn't want to disturb them. After nodding slightly to his sister-in-law, he followed Qin Ruiying to the west wing. However, although Xianxia didn't intend to interrupt them, Chenghua directly jumped out of the battle circle the moment he appeared, then quickly came in front of him and said hurriedly, "Mr. Qin, thank you for taking care of me during this period of time. I thank you in advance." Hearing this, Xianxia had to temporarily stop his footsteps. He glanced at Qin Ruiying's back, then glanced at Chenghua's anxious face. In the end he could only let out a long sigh, then asked impatiently, "What's the matter?" It was no wonder that Xianxia's attitude was so bad. After all, he could only step into the west wing every day at this time. Being delayed by Chenghua like this directly affected the time he had to chat with Yingying and cultivate their relationship. Chenghua was shocked by Xianxia's bad attitude. But after being stunned for a moment he seemed to have mustered up some courage. He quickly lowered his head and cupped his fist to Xianxia and said loudly, "I have been away from home for a long time. Next month is my mother's birthday. On such an important day, I hope you will allow me to go home and visit my mother. I understand. I am a sinner. Whether I live or die depends on your whims. My request may seem rude, but please allow me to return home for 3 days to fulfill my filial piety, sir. If you are worried, I can make a vow here that I will come back as soon as possible. If I disobey, Xianyuan Chenghua is willing to be struck by lightning and not enter the cycle of reincarnation after death." Perhaps he was afraid that Xianxia wouldn't agree, so Chenghua spilled the beans like a bamboo tube, spilling everything he wanted to say. After speaking, this kid was like a child who had done something wrong. He tilted his head and peeked at Xianxia eagerly. "It is your mother's 100th birthday, so you want to go home to fulfill your filial piety?" Hearing this, Xianxia did not immediately respond. Instead he looked at his sister-in-law thoughtfully. Although he had caught this kid with his own hands, he had already handed them over to his sister-in-law to deal with. Looking at this posture, this kid seemed to have calculated that he was easier to talk to than Qin Xueqing. So he did not even ask for Qin Xueqing's opinion and directly came to ask for his approval. Xianxia did not speak, but Chenghua was a little anxious. So he immediately knelt on the ground, bowed and shouted, "I hope you will allow me to go home on account of my filial piety. If not, I would rather commit suicide on the spot than live an ignoble life in this world." Chenghua's words were powerful and resonating. After hearing this, Xianxia laughed. "Oh, are you threatening me?" After hearing Xianxia's words, Chenghua's heart suddenly jumped. He suddenly remembered Xianxia's character. Oh no. Mr. Qin was always amenable to coaxing but not coercion. He had to change his method of asking him. Thinking of this, Chenghua immediately changed his strategy. Instead he looked at Xianxia with grief and indignation. At the same time he looked at Xianxia with a pitiful expression. Seeing that this kid had stopped talking and was looking at him so pitifully, Xianxia was too lazy to tease him anymore. So he directly asked Qin Xueqing, "Since the 2 of them are under your care, how do you think we should deal with this matter?" Hearing this, before Qin Xueqing could speak, a trace of despair flashed across Chenghua's face. They had known each other for so long. Xianxia would invite the 2 of them to sit down and eat together when he had nothing to do. But what about Qin Xueqing? Every day she would beat them up violently. He had never been kind to them. Therefore, the moment he heard Xianxia ask for Qin Xueqing's opinion, Chenghua's heart had already lost all hope. But what Chenghua did not expect was, Qin Xueqing's answer was 10,000 times better than he had imagined. "Everyone has parents. Since he is so filial, this request is not too much. But the two of you remember, this trip can't be delayed for too long. I heard that it takes 4 days to go back and forth from Earth to the Supreme Palace enclosure. In that case, I'll give the two of you 7 days off. If I don't see the two of you back after 7 days, I think the two of you should know very well what the consequences will be. After speaking, Qin Xueqing walked to the east wing without looking back. Only the two of them were left standing there in a daze. She agreed just like that. Cheng Hua was in a daze. Yiji blinked and could not help but wonder if he had heard wrongly. It was not his mother's birthday. He did not expect that he could actually go home with Cheng Hua to visit his family. Qin Xueqing actually agreed. Seeing the two of them looking as if they had seen a ghost, she could not help but smile. Then he turned around and walked into the west wing. If Cheng Hua and Yiji were to be seen as students, then Qin Xueqing was obviously their class teacher whom they feared like a tiger. Mischievous bad children were never liked by teachers. The two of them knew their place. Therefore, if they were to ask their class teacher to sign a leave of absence, they would rather forge a leave of absence than step into their class teacher's office. This was the general prejudice that bad children had against their class teacher. In fact, why would a class teacher discriminate against every child in her class? Therefore, even though her sister-in-law beat the two of them up every day, actually she was very warm in her heart.